Back when I was 17, my friend told me about this deep web drug website called Dream Market. It was where he bought things like weed and Adderall. He had what he referred to as a trusted dealer, whose information he sent me to buy from. I don't condone doing anything like this. I was simply just young and stupid. I thought buying Adderall would help me with my senior projects. Anyway, I went about doing that. However, this purchase made me intrigued to continue browsing Dream Market and seeing what else one could buy. And I saw this range from counterfeit bills to real guns. This got me more intrigued to view more of the deep web. I found some link somewhere on Dream Market that led to, I guess, what was a drug chat room, because it was just a lot of people seemingly advertising the drugs they were selling and their rates. I found it interesting. Some people would post random .onion links, and I clicked on one. It brought me to a black page with the title Home Base at top in large text. Underneath were a bunch of other random links. I clicked on a bunch of them. Most never loaded, probably being dead links. A couple loaded. One was another chat room. This one didn't have a title. There were like 3 usernames signed into the room, all random looking, just like the assortment of random letters I inputted just because I didn't care. The chat's previous history showed. A few people were talking in another language, then another guy was typing in English. That guy was still in the chat room, and actually, before I typed anything, he typed "yo" directed at me. I typed "yo" back. He said, "what you looking for?" I typed back, "I don't know, LOL." He asked how I found that link, and I told him just from some site called Home Base. I asked if he had any cool links, as it was my first time on the deep web. He types back LOL, then sent a link. He didn't say anything else. I clicked the link, and it took a little while to load the page. It loaded the black background first, then a little text box near the bottom, and the last thing that loaded was a video. At first I thought it was like a pausable video, but it looked to be some kind of live streaming video. The video was black and white, and it was of a dark room with some mannequin-looking thing sitting in a wooden chair. There was this grainy effect to the footage that made it feel more surreal and unnerving. I genuinely couldn't tell if I was watching a live video or not. Then, as if it were some kind of movie jump scare, what I thought was a mannequin in that chair suddenly jumped up and sprinted towards the camera, and a loud, staticky screaming sound accompanied it. The apparent porcelain mask that the person was wearing was so close up on the camera at that point that all I could see was black. I went back to the chat and asked that guy what the hell this was. He replied, "just keep watching, LOL," and then he left the chat. I went back to the other tab, and the video or live stream window was gone. It was now just a blank screen with a text box on the bottom. The text box didn't let me type anything though. My Tor browser window suddenly closed without my doing. Then a deep, raspy voice was coming from my speakers. It was someone obviously trying to disguise their voice. The voice said my first name and claimed they had all my files. Then the webcam window popped up and I saw my face on the screen. I turned off my laptop and went to the Geek Squad at Best Buy where I bought the computer. The guy I spoke to's guess was that he was able to somehow get the basic info off my computer, like my account name. He recommended I factory reset the computer. He helped me with the process. I didn't have anything I was worried about losing on there anyway. It was a relatively new computer. If you're ever on the deep web, I heavily recommend using some kind of VPN, even for the alleged safe websites. I'm 24 years old, and I'm from a small town called Yarmouth in Nova Scotia, Canada. I keep my social circle very small, just my few friends and my coworkers really. I mention that as a point in saying I don't really know anyone who would be out to get me in any way. I browse Reddit a lot in my free time. I'm an active poster. There was this one night when I pulled up Reddit on my browser out of boredom that I had a new message. Not unusual, as I'd have people messaging me in reference to my posts quite often. It was a message request from some random account, a now deleted username. The message said, "check your email, your spam folder specifically." I replied back, "Huh? Why, who's this?" In the meantime, I opened up my Gmail and went to the spam folder. There was one email that stuck out from the rest, titled in all caps, "I know who you are." I opened the email and it was basically a paragraph full of my personal information, including my full name, my Reddit password, my home address, along with threats. Basically, whoever sent the email was asking for a one-time payment of $5,000 through Bitcoin to a specific Bitcoin wallet address. My heart was basically in my throat. I had that terrible feeling of helplessness and like the entire world was collapsing in on me. The first thing I did was cover my webcam with a piece of tape. Secondly, I went back to Reddit to see if the user ever answered my message. They did not. I went to report the account on Reddit as quick as I could, as if that would even do anything though. I replied to the email, copy-pasting the exact message I sent to the Reddit account, asking who this was, how they got that information, and if this was a prank. I got an email back around 5 minutes later, in all capitals, saying, "No, it's not a prank, we have all your information, including where you live, so your best course of action is to do as we say and you'll never hear from us again." Obviously, I was not going to shell out $5,000, I don't even make a lot of money to begin with. I contacted all of my friends asking if it was any of them, like begging them to just come forward now before I'd call the police. None of them admitted to it, so given that I threatened calling the police, I knew it wasn't any of them. I tried to think of anyone at work who might have issues with me, but really I get along with everyone at work. I chalked it up to my password somehow being stolen by malware or a hacker, and through that they somehow got the rest of my information. The main question was, do I pay the money? And that was absolutely not happening. I forced myself to go to sleep and left my laptop off the whole next day. I used my desktop instead after getting home from work. I didn't sign into Reddit or anything though. I did, however, change my password on all other websites and apps on my phone. I finally signed into my laptop late that night because I was just so bored and curious. Curious but nervous to see if anything had changed and if I'd gotten any new emails. I signed on and everything on my computer still looked normal. So I went to Reddit and saw the user who messaged me was now deleted. So I went to a subreddit which talked about computer hackers and scams and such, and I posted my experience. At some point, I noticed the taskbar at the bottom of the screen turned darker. Curious, I minimized all my windows, and my desktop wallpaper was different. I knew right away what it was though. I recognized the outside of my bedroom window. The white frame of the outside windowsill was in the picture, and the flash of the camera also caught me laying in my bed sleeping. Some seconds later, a pop-up window appeared, along with the Windows error sound. Inside the pop-up error window was a message saying the word "pay" with a winking face following it. I closed my laptop screen and forced the computer off by holding the power button. I also pulled my blinds down and called my parents. It was still early enough to do so. I told my dad over the phone that some hacker had my info, and he came right over with his truck to help me load any valuables I could think of into his truck to stay with them for a while. Before we drove off from my apartment, my dad yelled like a madman into the night sky, basically threatening whoever was hacking me. It was definitely a scene, but I was too preoccupied with worry to be embarrassed by it. I stayed with my parents for weeks and used my mom's computer when needed. I blocked that email address that sent me the original email. I finally got back to my apartment a few days ago. I'm still scared every night to hear a knock at my window or get another threatening email. I haven't brought it to the police yet, as I'm hoping it's all just a bluff still to get me to pay. I'm also hoping it's over and that they've given up. My name is Miranda, I'm 25. I've had my share of experiences with stalkers and men harassing me. Social media has made that far too easy these days. I once got a suspicious email that I should have known better than to open. It was asking me to click a link to some random page because I was being sued by some random company. I clicked the link, and soon after that my computer started acting all glitchy and unresponsive. Even after restarting it multiple times, it was just laggy and slow, and random sound effects would play once in a while. I was certain my computer had a virus, but I wasn't sure to what extent it would go just yet. The next day, I had a bunch of friends texting me what's up with that Instagram post and asking if I was the one who even posted it. I panicked and opened Instagram, but I was logged out of my account. Someone was hacking me, this confirmed it. If they had my Instagram password, I had no idea what else they could have. Apparently the picture posted on my Instagram was some stupid cartoon meme. It was extremely embarrassing. Minutes of freaking out later, my Snapchat started blowing up. It was from some random account that just added me. They were spamming me to Snapchat call them, so I did. When they picked up, I saw like a quarter of someone's face. It looked like a young guy in his 20s. I could tell he was smiling, that was the creepy thing. The way he said hello was so long and stretched out. I was pretty frantic, asking what he wanted in return for my Instagram back. He started telling me some really creepy shit. He said he sees me every day and that he thinks I'm really pretty, and that this was the only way he'd get my attention. I didn't know what to say. He said he'd give me my account back if I would just be his digital girlfriend. As creepy and weird as this was, I said yes in a heartbeat just to get my stuff back. He told me the password to get back onto my Instagram account, and as soon as I changed the password, I set my profile to private and put a story up saying that wasn't me, I was hacked. I asked this guy for his name and what other info he had on me. He said I could just call him John, and that he could get all the information about me that he wanted. He said this with a smile too. I could see it in the fourth of his face that he would actually show. He refused to show the rest. I played nice the whole time, knowing this guy's a sicko. I managed to get him off the call by telling him I'd snap him tomorrow. I then told all my friends about it and asked what I should do. They all unanimously said I should activate two-factor verification on my Instagram account and then deactivate the account and then block him. When I did all of that though, he didn't take it too well. An hour later, I got a new Snap user blowing up my Snap. I knew it was him, but I opened the snaps anyway. And it was him again threatening me, saying he knows where I live and blocking him was a stupid thing to do. I showed it to my parents now because it was getting serious, so my dad called the police. I didn't block the guy's Snapchat yet though, and I'm glad I didn't. As my parents and I were sitting in the kitchen waiting, I got a snap from the guy. It was a video. I waited a few seconds before opening it. It was a video of him sitting in his car in front of our house, with the caption, "Don't block me again." My dad ran outside in a fit of rage. We tried to stop him, but he wouldn't. But the car wasn't even in front of the house anymore. The guy probably waited until driving away before sending that snap. I'm just gonna say the police did absolutely nothing. They seemed clueless on the matter. But there's not much police could do in hacker situations anyway, apparently. However, I did send a snap of the police car back to the guy, and put a caption, "Fuck with me again, you'll be arrested." He opened the snap and immediately blocked me, so I'd say it worked. This story has a happier ending than most, I guess. But the amount of info some people can get from you online is absolutely terrifying. This video topic is gaming horror stories, and this video is appropriately sponsored by Opera GX. I spent a lot of time finding stories trying to scare you guys, but did you know default browsers are scaring your computer resources? Opera GX is on a mission to get people to break up with boring browsers like Chrome, Edge, and Safari. With the GX control feature, you can enhance performance on your PC when gaming with your browser open, and get rid of lag while playing games and listening to music. Perfect for when you want to keep a bunch of tabs open to not lose them, but you don't want your browser to hurt your gaming performance. The panel lets users limit the amount of CPU or RAM they're willing to let their browser use. My personal favorite feature is GX Mods. Opera GX offers you a lot of customization. It can actually be overwhelming. However, with GX Mods, you can now find ways to flip your entire browser 180 with one click and change pretty much anything you want. If you want to hear a ghost wailing anytime you click the search button, or you want to turn your entire browser into an arcade, it's easy. Choose one of the many mods already added to the browser, or create a completely new one that suits you best. Opera GX is also equipped with an import tool that allows you to quickly import all your settings from your previous browser to Opera GX, like browsing history, bookmarks, and cookies. It's also compatible with every Google Chrome extension. So while classic horror movie tropes like running upstairs when chased are pretty boring, cliche, and worn out, that doesn't mean your browser has to be too. So if you're interested, use my link below to download Opera GX today. I live in Chandler, Arizona. This happened when I was like 17 and in my heavy gaming phase, still living with my parents. I played a lot of Call of Duty in my room on my computer in those days, especially in the summertime when it's so unbearably hot outside and I prefer to stay inside in the air conditioning anyway. Back when I lived at home, I'd have the place to myself a lot because my parents travel a lot and I was the last one to move out. If I recall correctly, this was on a Friday night, or a night that school was out the next day because I was staying up late. After I got home from school, I submitted a paper that was due that night to get it over with. Then I had to do some shopping afterwards on my mom's orders since they'd be gone for a while. It was how I earned my keep in the house, according to my dad. They left cash for me to use. I always had to show them the receipt though, so that I wouldn't just pocket any of the money. My mom gave me a shopping list, so I went to Whole Foods in my old Camry, my first car. Shopping took about an hour door to door. While in the grocery store, this guy online behind me started talking to me, and I don't know why. He made a comment about one of the things I was buying and just wouldn't stop. Even as I was bagging my groceries, he kept talking to me, which I found weird. He wasn't paying attention to anyone else. I was still nice though. When it was time to leave, I said have a good one and left. I went out to my car in the parking lot and packed the trunk, then headed home. It was a scorching hot day, as we were in early June. I wasn't looking to go out and do anything outside once I was done with everything I needed to do. It was dark out by now, so I got right on Call of Duty Black Ops on my computer and texted my friend Johnny to get on as well. He joined my party, and we played some team deathmatch as we always did. I was using my noise-canceling Logitech headset. We were committed already to playing Call of Duty all night and ranking up, so of course I needed to take a break to make dinner at some point. Probably 2 hours into playing, I told Johnny I was going to eat dinner and I'd probably be back on in an hour. He said he'd be back on later too. So with that, I took a break and made some pasta for dinner. The kitchen is downstairs and my room is upstairs. While I was sitting in the kitchen eating, I knew for sure I heard a thump from upstairs. Did it sound like a footstep? I wasn't sure. It could have been any number of things, but the last thing I'd imagine it would be a footstep. I did, however, go and lock the front door now. Oftentimes for a while I would leave the door unlocked just because my parents' house is in a good side of town, and I just never took the idea of a break-in seriously. It's something you hear about on the news, but don't think it'll ever happen to you. I went upstairs, and I don't know what I was expecting, but I said my brother Tristan's name into the hallway. I knew he wasn't supposed to be here, but I don't know. I heard a sound, and I felt the urge to see if anyone was here. When no one answered back, I went back to my room and got back on Call of Duty. I put my headset back on and texted Johnny that I'm going back on. Shortly after he came back on, we started playing team deathmatch again. A couple games in, I looked to my left at the doorway of my room into the hallway. I don't know if something in my peripheral vision or some other sense felt something there, but I would leave the door open when I was home alone, as my mom would tell me to. The hallway was dark except for the one little nightlight plugged into an outlet. My room shone blue from my wall lights. Some of the blue poured into the part of the hallway closest to my room. In between the crack of the door was total blackness. I couldn't see through it. I didn't think anything of it. After our next game, Johnny said he was taking a leak and walked away while we were in the lobby. I looked at my phone, then looked back out to the hallway, and I noticed something was different. Now I could see through the crack of the door into the hallway. My first thought was someone blocking it just minutes ago? By instinct, I spun my chair around to face the bed behind me, and there was a man sitting on my bed, with his freakishly upright posture, and his hands resting on his thighs. He almost looked to be smiling. I was so alarmed I jumped out of my seat onto the desk and crawled onto the desk, causing my monitor and basically everything else to fall off of it. I screamed, "What do you want?" And he started to actually smile now, showing his teeth, like he was laughing. I ran out of the room into the hallway. I stopped halfway down the hallway and looked back at my bedroom door. I heard the springs of my bed lifting, and then the guy slowly walked into the doorway and stopped. He stood there. I once again yelled, "What do you want?" He then spoke in a stuttered, slow voice, asking if he could play too. I asked, "How did you get in here?" He stepped a few steps forward and pointed down the stairs. I assume he was implying he entered through the front door. I was at a loss for what to do, so I ran down the stairs to the landline phone, as my cell phone was still in my room. I grabbed the phone and a kitchen knife and screamed, "You need to leave, I'm calling 911. I heard footsteps walking down the steps, and the last time I saw the guy was when he walked past the kitchen, looked at me, and then I heard him walking out the front door. I ran to slam it shut and lock it. For the first time ever, I was ashamed at myself for leaving the door completely unlocked. I held the phone for a few minutes, deciding whether to tell my parents. Ultimately, I did. My mom was concerned at first, then grew livid, so much so to the point that she put my dad on the phone. He told me to go through the house and make sure nothing was taken. I went through every room, and honestly, everything seemed in place. I said the man seemed like something was off about him, and my dad said, "Yeah, no shit." The man didn't seem overtly hostile, but something was wrong with him, and I don't know what his intention was. The image of him sitting on my bed and the realization that he was watching me through the crack in the door was haunting enough. This is a story I'm not proud of, mostly for my naivety. When I was in middle school and early high school, I didn't know how to talk to girls at all at school, but that's a lot of boys in middle school. I wasn't shy in general. I had friends and did normal things an 8th grader would do. I just had never kissed a girl or anything. Some of my friends at the time claimed they've already gone further than that with girls, and I was starting to feel pressure. But I was still having trouble approaching girls in that way. The mentality went from boys making fun of girls to suddenly liking them in a matter of like a year. I was a pretty big gamer in middle school and early high school. This was when I was in 8th grade. I was like 13. My voice was still probably a bit prepubescent sounding. It was 2010. I played a lot of console games and computer MMORPG games. My favorite console games at the time were GTA 4 and Call of Duty, and my favorite computer game was this MMORPG called Gunzu. It was this online game where you would level up by killing monsters, and the more you leveled up, the higher level monsters and hunting grounds you'd be able to tackle. The online community in this game was very active, and there were tons of players. My older brother used to play it a little bit too. I played it more for sure though. I was in a guild and town and everything. I don't remember how it happened, but I befriended this female player who was a higher level than me. Her username was Medusa. Anytime I'd sign in and she was on, she'd message me, and vice versa. We would join parties together, which meant we'd share EXP on whatever monsters we killed, and we'd just chat for hours. She knew a lot about me, including my age, my town, and some personal family details. She would open up to me too. Eventually she told me her name was Teresa. It was weird feeling such a connection with a girl who really you knew nothing about her appearance or her voice. It truly was like having a pen pal but better. It was interesting enough that we both lived in New York State. She lived about an hour from me. After a few weeks, or maybe even a month, we started talking about maybe meeting one day. To do this though, we'd have to exchange numbers. At the time I didn't actually have a cell phone yet. I only had an iPod Touch. But I was able to download some texting app that allowed me to send messages to people with cell phones. Through this app, I was able to send her a picture of myself. It was definitely this cringy 8th grade boy selfie of me trying to look good looking. She called me cute, and then she sent back a picture of herself. She looked a couple years older than me, like 15, which was the age she told me she was. Based on the picture, I found her very attractive. This was around the time our messages became more flirtatious and romantic. But we were both minors, and so of course neither of us could just go drive an hour away. However, she apparently had a solution for this. She told me her sister had friends that lived around me anyway, and she could probably get a ride to me. This was exciting news for my little 13-year-old self. I wanted to wait for a day and night that my parents wouldn't be home and I'd have the house to myself, which was about a week later, I believe. My parents were going to the Hamptons for the whole weekend, so it would just be my brother and I home. My brother was 18, so I asked him to please just go out for the night with friends so that I could be alone with Teresa. I gave Teresa my address and told her to come that Saturday whenever she wanted. She said she'd be coming a little later, like at night. She didn't give me an exact time. At that point in time, we still had never spoken on the phone. I still hadn't heard her voice. I was so nervous all day that I couldn't even play video games. I was busy cleaning my room, making things look cool, fixing my appearance, even rehearsing things to say in the initial moments of meeting. Then I got a message from Teresa saying she's here. I sprang up and ran to the front door. I looked through the peephole and didn't see anyone. She then said you can come out to the front door. I opened the door and stepped onto the front porch. I looked around and the street was dark and quiet. No cars, no people. I went back inside and shut the door. I messaged her back saying I don't see you. She said back, oh, I must have the wrong house. Give me a minute. That was a bit weird. I locked the door and sat on the living room couch, nervously waiting, playing games on my iPod. I got a message from her again. She said she's here and to come outside. I replied, ring the bell so I know you're at the right house. Then the doorbell rang. My nerves really set in now. I walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and didn't see anyone. I said, Teresa, through the door. Through the peephole, I saw a hand reach towards the door and knock. I said Teresa again, as I kept looking through the peephole. Everything felt like it instantly crumbled down on top of me as this bald, creepy-looking short guy stepped in front of the peephole and then said through the door, "Hey Joey, it's Medusa from Gunzu. I want to talk." I ran away from the door with my hands over my mouth, truly speechless. The person I'd been talking to all this time was a creepy grown man. I was disgusted and scared. I went to call my brother's cell phone. He didn't pick up. The doorbell kept ringing. I went to my bedroom and locked myself in. I held the house phone in my grasp, considering calling my parents, but too embarrassed to do so. My room was the only other room in the house with the lights on. I have a big window in my room that overlooks the whole side yard of our corner house. I turned off my lamp and slightly kinked the blind just a crack, and I saw that guy on the other side trying to look in. He started to knock on the window and started saying through the closed window how much of a connection we clearly have and that we can at least be friends. I responded nothing. I called my brother again, and he picked up this time. I said, "Please come home right now. The Teresa person was a grown man the entire time, and he's at my window right now." My brother's always been pretty big, even as a teenager. I'd feel safer with him being here. He said he was coming home with his friends right now. We stayed on the phone so I could tell him if anything happened. I ran to my parents' bedroom upstairs and hid there. The man was blowing up my message app, saying he would like to talk and there's a reason he had to lie about who he was. When my brother got home, he told me he sees the guy outside. My brother and his 3 friends confronted the creepy short man outside, so I went outside now to watch. The 4 of them intimidated the man, calling him a sick fuck and such. And the man's defense was that he was concerned for my well-being, inviting strangers from online over, and that this was supposed to be a learning lesson. I refuted this claim by asking him why he would say that we could be good friends at my window. When my brother and his friends started pushing the man, he started quickly walking to his car. My brother kicked the guy's taillight, while one of his friends threw a rock at his window. He sped off down the road to never be seen again. This was humiliating and disturbing, but at the same time, I was really grateful of my brother and his friends to come to my aid. They potentially saved me from a seriously sick creep breaking into the house. It's still painful and uncomfortable, realizing all that time I spent opening up to who I thought was a girl my own age on a game was some creepy grown man with a different agenda. This happened last week. Just a bit of background information. I had just officially quit playing Fortnite. Not that it's important, but this was May 2021, so Fortnite had already had a lot of people quitting the game. My friend Brandon suggested that I download Apex Legends and play with him. I had already had the game downloaded, so I just updated it to the current version. So I logged on, and I remembered how bad I was at this game. I hadn't played since the game came out, so my stats were awful, and I had only the starting Legends. I mained Pathfinder and Bloodhound because I just thought that they were the 2 best starters. Something else to note, I have a very loud gaming headset, so I could barely hear any background noise. But to get to the actual story, it happened when I was home alone. My parents had gone out for their week-late anniversary dinner, and my brother was at his friend's house. I was playing Apex with Brandon, when he suddenly got a text from a random number. He said, "Dude, what the fuck, I just got a random message." "What does it say?" I asked. I remember exactly how it went. He said, "Look out the window." "Don't look out the window, dude, there's nothing there," I replied. "No," he says, "look out your window." "What? Why?" I said, as I turned my head slightly to the right, then to the left. I didn't know which window to look out of, since this room has 5 windows. I looked at each of them in a panic. Then I found it. The one that was least visible from my couch. There was this man just standing there. I was clueless. I didn't think much of it because the dude was facing away from the window. Little did I know just yet. I put my headphones back on. Brandon just got another text. He told me, "Luke, I'm not messing with you. Dude, there's someone outside your window." "I know," I told him. "I just saw him. He's just looking the other way." "What?" he asked. "He just took a picture of you at the window looking clueless." "What the fuck?" I said. "I suggest you call the cops and get him out of there," he tells me. Then, strangely, he stopped talking, and there was that sound of an Xbox notification. He left the party. He never does that without saying bye or that he's going to bed, and I saw he was still in Apex playing in a match. What the fuck, I muttered to myself again. Eventually I got a party invitation from Brandon, and asked what happened.
Next thing I know, there was a deeper voice than Brandon's on the mic. I remember in every little detail what it said. "Come outside right now, or I will come in." I couldn't recognize the voice at all, but I knew the voice was that of a grown man. I looked back at the window, and sure enough, there he was banging on the window. He looked completely demented. His face was a dark red, with his hands gushing blood. As he pounded on the window, it started to crack. I picked up my phone, which was right next to me. I was horrified to see it was at 1%, basically out of battery. I kept saying "oh shit" over and over. I put my phone to my ear and mouthed the words, "There's a man trying to break into my house. His face is dark red and his hands are bleeding." Next thing I know, he starts screaming while bashing at my window. Then I thought, wait a second. There's screen sheets in front of all of our windows. So how, if he never cut it, was he already at the glass? I took too much time to think. Finally, a shard of glass falls to the ground. A hole large enough for me to shout through opens up. I screamed, "Go the f*** away before the cops get here, you son of a bitch." I used too much breath on those words. Another shard falls, then another. I went to get a large knife from the knife block we have in the kitchen, and I returned to where the man was breaking the window. There was already a hole big enough for him to crawl through, and he had already started. I ran back to the kitchen and grabbed the cordless phone, ran upstairs and dialed 911. I told them the exact words that I mouthed on my cell phone earlier, along with the fact that he was now inside my home. Unfortunately, the only doors with locks upstairs are the bathrooms, so thinking on my feet, I went into my parents' room, into that bathroom, and locked the door. At that moment, I was thinking I was being smart because I left the bedroom door wide open, and the bathroom door that's actually inside the bedroom is not visible from the bedroom door. I thought if that guy managed to come upstairs before the cops got here, he would see the door wide open and think I wasn't in here. Suddenly, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. My heart started pounding harder than ever, and it got harder to breathe. I opened one of the drawers looking for something sharp that I could maybe use as a weapon, and I think he must have heard the drawer, because he came stomping into the bedroom. I heard sirens outside, and I never could have thanked the cops enough for being so fast. He heard it too, and at this point he had nowhere to go. I heard him run outside, but he was too late. The police were out front already. I ran outside to the police as well, and I told them what happened. The man was arrested, handcuffs put around his bloodied wrists. I later figured out that I had killed that guy in Apex and kind of shit-talked him just an hour or two before. Somehow he got my address and Brandon's phone number. Some people are just fucked up in the head, and apparently they will do unspeakable things for video games. Everyone gets frustrated from getting killed in a game, but really, showing up at a person's house to potentially kill them in real life over a game is really messed up. This guy had to be mental. A few police cars stayed at my house overnight after the others had taken the man away. The man was convicted for aggravated burglary.
It was October 1st. That fresh autumn breeze was in the air. It felt like fall, my favorite season. It was my boyfriend Carter and I's first fall living together in our new home. I wanted to surprise Carter by decorating the place with fall and Halloween-themed decorations before he got home from work one day. I thought it would be cute. I bought a few things from a nearby Marshall's and a few other stores, and I also looked on different apps and websites, most notably Facebook Marketplace. I simply typed in fall decorations, and one listing really caught my attention. It was a picture of a big green plastic container, which contained a bunch of fall decorations. I clicked on it for more details, and more or less it said everything must go, entire container of fall-themed decorations for sale for cheap. The price was only $20. It was a steal if that entire big container was full of decorations. At the bottom of the ad, it also said, selling other stuff, clearing out house, everything must go. Check my profile. So I clicked his profile and looked at some of the other listings he had. There was a weird assortment of things this guy was selling. An allegedly new iPhone for $700, a few articles of women's clothing, and Christmas decorations. There were others, but I didn't go through all of them. The profile itself was kind of low-key. Everything was private. The man's name was Cody, and his profile picture was a close-up of a gray trucker's cap on a guy's head, but his face was covered by the brim of the hat. The cover photo was a blurry photo of a lake. I messaged the profile and he replied instantly. I asked what kind of decorations were in the container, and he said all sorts. Tableware, outdoor decorations, etc. So I excitedly told the man I would come by them today if he were available. He confirmed he would be around later on, closer to 9 p.m., as that's when he'd get home from work. He sent me an address. I looked up the address on Google Maps Street View. It was not in the best town, honestly, but the house looked completely normal. 2 cars in the driveway in the Street View picture, lawn kept nice, so I agreed to meet. I had my friend Sally come with me just to be safe. I went to pick up Sally across town, and we were off to this Cody person's house. It was a half-hour drive. Sally and I had some time to catch up on the drive there. When we got off the highway entering the town that the house was in, Sally started half joking around about how sketchy the area was. I say half joking around because I know she was saying that partially to be funny and make light of the situation, but also because everyone just kind of knows this really isn't the best town. It was dark out though, so honestly we didn't see much besides streetlights, traffic lights, and some storefronts. As we got closer, I saw my phone screen turning on as it vibrated in the cup holder of my car. At the next light, I checked my phone and saw that it was messages from Cody on Messenger. He said, "When you get here, you can come right in." I showed it to Sally and she said, "What the hell?" We both could agree that that was a bit uncomfortable and that we'd ring the doorbell anyway. We pulled up to the house and surprisingly, there were no cars in the driveway. There were dim lights on in the house though that could barely be seen through the closed blinds of the windows. I messaged Cody back saying, "We're here, can you come to the front?" Sally and I both watched the house as I waited for a response. And then we both noticed at the same exact time, at one of the windows, the blinds slightly shift, indicating someone was watching us through them. Then, just as quickly as we noticed it, the opening in the blinds closed. A few seconds later, the front door opened, and Cody messaged me back saying, "I'm at the door, you can come in." It was a bit of an unsettling situation, and I was just happy I brought Sally along. The 2 of us got out of my car and walked closer to the front door. Before getting too close, I called out Cody's name a few times, only to get no response. Sally whispered we should leave. I took a few steps closer and said "Cody" one more time really loud, and there was no response. I turned and whispered, "Let's go," and we started walking back to the car, when suddenly I heard a guy say, "Hey, yes, I'm here, inside." We turned and saw a man at the doorway, but only about half of him. He was like peering only half of his body around the door. He waved us inside. Sally and I cautiously turned back and started walking back to the door. As I got closer, he fully opened the door, but then also walked out of view. We walked up the steps and into the house, keeping the front door open, and right away got hit with a strong scent, like that cotton scent from an old person's house mixed with something very unpleasant. We heard fast and heavy footsteps moving away into another room, followed by his voice saying, "It's over in here, come here." His voice was freakishly deep, like it was intimidating. I made sure Sally was right by my side before entering the adjacent room. We were faced with a very weird sight. A dimly lit living room with a depressing pinkish red carpet and really old-looking furniture. But the smell in this room was putrid. It smelled like actual death. In the middle of the room was a red container with a green lid on top of it. There was this Cody man standing just over the container. This was the first time I got a good, clear look at the man, and he was not a friendly-looking man. He invited me over to come open the container. I took note of the fact that this container was not the same color as the green container that was in the picture on the Facebook ad. It also was a completely different shape from the looks of it. I asked him to open it himself, and he said, "Well, you're no fun." That comment already had Sally and I inching backwards in the direction of the front door. But when he lifted the lid off the container and we were suddenly blasted with another putrid smell, we turned for the door and left in a hurry without looking back until we got to the car. Sally kept telling me to hurry up. By the time my car was on, all I know is the front door to the house was already closed. I don't know if he was watching us through the window again. We were gone very quickly. We never actually saw what was in that container. It was definitely not decorations, though. After telling Carter about all of this, he asked for the address of the place, and I told him not to go there. He assured me he wouldn't, he just wanted to look up the house, so I gave it to him. The next day, he returned home later than usual from work, and he told me he stopped by the house, and an older woman answered the door, insisting that she lives there alone. He knew I wasn't lying though, because I showed him all the Facebook messages with the guy, which included the address. Upon looking up the records of that address, it does list the owner as a woman in her late 60s. This was an incredibly disturbing and unexplainable experience. From now on, when buying stuff online, I avoid going to people's houses. It was 2019 when this happened. I remember specifically because it was the year I was living on my own in Asheville, North Carolina. I moved here for a temporary job, and it was an excuse for me to live on my own for the first time. I was 22 years old and just out of college. I had an apartment in downtown. I could walk to most things I needed, but I also had my car for when I wanted to branch out or venture out of town. The thing I loved about Asheville and North Carolina in general was the sheer amount of hiking trails. I'd been to many around town, but one I hadn't been to was DuPont State Forest. One day I decided to go. The drive was just under an hour from Asheville. It was a random Wednesday in October. The leaves were starting to change, and it was the perfect time for a hike. I didn't have work that day, and it being a work day for everyone else, it meant I'd probably have the trails all to myself. I got to the parking area for the park, and I found where one of the trails began. I walked for a while, and the trail was serene. I was the only one out there that day. It was a cloudy day, and we'd been getting a lot of rain that week, which was more of a reason I wanted to go, because the trail would lead to some nice waterfalls called Triple Falls and High Falls, and the waterfalls would be more impressive after a few days of rainfall. I only had to hike about 0.4 miles before getting to the Triple Falls, which was a really cool sight. A little piece of trivia, a scene in the Hunger Games was filmed at this waterfall. I took a few videos and pictures as I sat on a rock for a bit. I noticed a woman in the woods on the trail. She was looking at me. I waved at her, trying to be polite, and she just turned around and slowly walked deeper into the woods until she was out of sight. Not really something I gave a second thought to. Anyway, I wasn't tired yet. I had literally just started hiking, so I didn't sit for too long. I got up and headed back to the trail. I didn't want to try climbing the rocks of the waterfall because they were incredibly slippery. I continued to ascend up the trail and eventually came to the higher point of the falls called High Falls. I took a few more videos and pictures here and sat on another dry rock for a bit. I swear I felt a sense of deja vu when I saw that woman again in the woods by the trail. Once again, she was staring me down. I didn't wave this time. I instead looked down at my phone, pretending not to notice or care. I couldn't help but glance up after like 10 seconds, and now she was gone. If I had to guess, the woman was like 55. She had short, grayish blonde hair from the looks of it. But again, she was pretty far away, so this was all just what I saw of her from a distance. I didn't see which way she went, but whatever way it was, I wanted to go the opposite. I kept walking the direction I'd been walking, and eventually came to another landmark of the trail, the covered bridge. I once again stopped here to take a scenic video and a few photos. I drank a bit of my water, and then looked at the end of the bridge from the side I had just walked from. I saw that woman. I swear I didn't see her there before I started taking videos and pictures. I also didn't hear anyone walking behind me. She was once again staring right at me as if I were doing something wrong. I was getting annoyed. I started walking over to her and said, "Excuse me," but she just turned around and started walking away. Actually, the speed at which she was walking away for someone at her age was unsettling. I almost felt concern at the possibility that she may have been somebody with special needs that needed help, but I didn't convince myself to go chasing after her. I just leaned on the edge of the bridge for a few minutes before deciding to turn back. I had already been hiking for about 45 minutes, and it would take another 45 to get back down to the car. Walking back down the trail I came, in the direction that woman had gone, I passed a younger woman walking her dog. So I decided to stop her and ask if she'd seen an older woman pass by. She said no, and just trying to make conversation about it, talk to somebody about it, I told her how I kept seeing that woman popping out of nowhere and looking at me, then just walking off. She laughed and said that's really strange. I didn't want to take up too much of her time, so after we both shared a laugh about it, I continued on my way. The entire way down the trail, I grew a bit paranoid that I'd see that woman lurking around in the background somewhere again, but all was quiet on the way down. I passed one other person who gave me a friendly smile and a nod. Other than that, I made it back to my car undisturbed. Later that day, I went on a date with a girl I was seeing there. We went to our favorite local bar to get some pumpkin spice beers and watch baseball. I told her about the woman on the trail, and she found it amusing, because honestly it did sound funny. After that, I went home. Fast forward to that night when I was in bed. I hardly ever wake up in the middle of the night. I'm a pretty heavy sleeper normally, so me waking up in the middle of the night in the dark was unusual. I was still coming to when I heard something at the foot of my bed. I looked up and saw the figure of a woman at the foot of my bed. I felt as though my insides had just fallen out of my body. I started screaming so loud that I'm sure my neighbors could have heard it, even with the windows closed. I started crawling against my headboard, trying to distance myself as much as possible from the female figure at the foot of my bed. Then she just turned and walked out of the room. I stopped screaming now, more so trying to just catch my breath and slow my rapidly beating heart. I flicked on the lamp and started shouting, "Who's there?" I listened, but there was dead silence. I grabbed the knife I had in the nightstand next to my bed and jumped out of bed. I flicked on every light switch I passed until the entire apartment was lit up. There was no one there. Not in the closets, not behind a couch, not under any beds, and so I called my father. I didn't know what else to do. I needed to share what just happened with somebody. My father groggily picked up the phone, and after explaining to him, he said I must have hallucinated it while I was still in my half-asleep state. He said I wasn't fully awake yet, and so I could have been seeing things. I knew deep down he was probably right, but it didn't make the image I saw any less real-looking or horrifying. And then I told him about the woman in the park, and how the figure at my bed actually resembled her. He said if anything, that further proves his point that my brain conjured up a familiar image from earlier that day. Somehow, I went back to sleep that night, with my bedroom door barricaded with my dresser just in case. It wasn't until 2 days later that I heard from my mom that her sister in Germany died. I'd never met my aunt. She'd been basically estranged from my mom, as she hadn't left Germany in over 25 years. My mom and uncle flew to Germany to attend the funeral, and it wasn't until she got back home and I saw the prayer card with my aunt's face on it that once again I felt like my organs dropped out of my body when I realized she looked identical to the woman I saw on the trail that day and hallucinated at the foot of my bed. This story shook my whole family, especially because I told my dad about all of it and the hallucination before we even got news of my aunt's passing. I was born a Catholic, but never found myself to be super religious after confirmation. But goddamn, does this really send shivers down my spine and make me question what exactly I believe in. My friend Carlos and I like to do stupid things together. We've been friends since we were 10, and when we were 21, we became roommates. We lived in Brunswick, Georgia, where we grew up. A little coastal town that had its pros and cons, but overall was an okay place to grow up. But it got boring as we entered our 20s. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. While we did live there, we knew about a creepy looking house that differed from the rest of the houses in town, in that it looked like it was built in a different century. It had long been abandoned, and we and our friends would make up stories about its history. It was mid-October, and everyone was in Halloween mode. People were doing Halloween-themed activities like haunted houses and corn mazes and such. We thought it would be fun one Friday night to go break into that house and explore. So after we were both home from our jobs, we both grabbed baseball bats to bring with us, stopped for some fast food and beers on the way, and drove to the house. We parked all the way down the road just not to be suspicious. The houses around there were not that close together, so each property was pretty big, which meant we were less likely to get caught snooping around. We both grabbed a couple beers each and threw them in our backpacks. Not sure why we thought we were going to drink in there, but along with that, we stuffed our baseball bats into the sides, just so no one would see us walking around with baseball bats in our hands late at night looking like trouble. We quietly walked down the street, just whispering to each other. It took less than 5 minutes to get to the house. It was so dark on this part of the street because this house, along with the house across the street, had no lights on. There weren't any street lights on the street. Whatever light there may have been would have had to come from one of the few houses with their lights on. From here on, we used our flashlights we brought. The front lawn had a bunch of dirt patches, and the patches of grass were overgrown. Lots of weeds everywhere, it seemed. We walked around to the backyard to look for an entry point because doing that out front seemed stupid for obvious reasons. Shockingly, the back door was already unlocked. The The place wasn't boarded up or anything. The back windows weren't even smashed. We knew that the place was abandoned though, everybody did. We walked right in. Navigating inside of there would have been impossible had it not been for our flashlights. The house was bigger than some of the neighboring houses, yet the inside felt very cramped. Like there were a lot of rooms, but they were smaller, almost giving the house a maze-like feeling. Carlos stepped into another room away from me, and at that moment I was alone. I heard his voice say from another room, "Yo, there's still furniture everywhere." I responded, "Yeah, this place must have been abandoned in a hurry." Everything seemed ancient, like furniture in my grandma's house, only not used in years. I walked around the first floor some more, and came to a tiny corridor with a few doors that led to bedrooms. I entered one of the bedrooms, and it was incredibly cramped. The bed took up 80% of the room. I went through some of the drawers in the dresser, but they all seemed like they'd already been gone through. Same with the closet. Anything left behind besides this old furniture just looked like junk. I heard Carlos say he's going upstairs. I said back, okay. We were speaking at a volume that was just loud enough for each of us to hear. After checking out the other bedroom down on the first floor, which was equally cramped, I went back out to the corridor. There were two other doors, one that led to a bathroom, and then when I opened the final door, I was looking down a long stairway to a basement. I decided, fuck it, I'm walking down. I started descending the steps, each step squeaking and cracking under my weight. I got about halfway down the steps when I realized there was a faint glow coming from down there. I turned off my flashlight, and yes, there was still a little faint glow coming from down there. I should have turned and left in that moment like any normal person, but I do stupid things. Like I die first in a horror movie most likely. I continued down the stairs with my flashlight off, and when I got to the bottom, I looked around the walls separating the stairs from the rest of the basement, and I saw what was just barely lighting up the room. It was two tall candles sitting on a table, but that wasn't the first thing I noticed. What I saw first was what was next to that, and it was some kind of sofa rocking chair, and it was rocking. Someone was seated in it. It was facing away from the stairway. All I could see was a hand on one of the arms of the chair. I had to get out of there. I started going back up the stairs as quietly as I could, with each crack and squeak causing me to cringe in fear. I was halfway up the stairs now. I looked back down and could still see the faint glow of the candles, so I continued as quietly as I could. I was almost to the top, and one stair creaked especially loud. I paused for a moment, clenching my teeth so hard. I proceeded up the final steps and made it to the top. I turned to shut the door, but I noticed it was pitch black down there now. The thought of the candles having been put out sent a shiver down my spine. I quietly closed the door, and then I tiptoed around this cramped maze of a house until I found the stairway going upstairs. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and quietly called up to Carlos. He wasn't responding. I sighed and started quietly going up the stairs, repeating Carlos's name. Still no response. I had to go all the way up to the top of the stairs, repeating his name, and he still wouldn't respond. So I said, "If you're trying to scare me, stop joking around. There's someone in the basement. We need to get out of here." That got his attention because he stepped out from a dark room and asked if I was serious. I told him I'd explain outside, but that I'm not kidding. He followed me down the stairs. I was trying less so to be quiet now because I just wanted to get out of that house. We were heading back to the back door where we entered, but when we passed the corridor with the basement door, we both saw the silhouette of a man standing in front of the door. The time for sneaking around was over. I kept repeating just go as we booked it outside and ran for my car. We made it to the car in like 30 seconds. I was already winded by the time we made it back. I backed the car off that street and started driving us home. In the car ride was when I explained in detail what I saw. All Carlos kept saying was, "Yo, what the fuck?" to everything I said. He was in just as much disbelief as me. So while no, I don't think anyone legally lived in that house, I do think someone was squatting in there, down in that basement. Who knows who it was? Honestly, who cares? I just never returned anywhere near that street.
There used to be a pond about half a mile away from my old house that I would commonly go fishing in. It was nicknamed Daryl's Pond. I still have no idea who Daryl was or why it was called that, but nobody owned it, so people would once in a blue moon go fishing there as well. It was usually me by myself though. I had dug a pole into the ground where I would tie a noose to and from my small kayak. I'd say it was about 3 in the afternoon when I rowed out to the middle of the pond, the sweet spot for getting a decent catch. There was another person coming out from the trees. I waved at him and gave him a smile. He hopped into a small boat floating by the edge of the pond and began to row over to me. As he got close enough where trying to speak to him wouldn't come off as obnoxious, I gave him a friendly, "Perfect day, isn't it?" "Yes, absolutely," he said. He didn't say anything after that, and I started to feel a bit awkward, as if I were obligated to keep some kind of conversation rolling now. "So, you come out here to throw some lines?" I asked. "No, I don't actually fish." "Oh, well, it's never a bad day to relax on the pond," I said. He continued to row closer to me until his boat collided with mine, creating a big thud. I was genuinely uncomfortable now. I didn't feel threatened, just weirded out. I was only 24 years old. This guy looked like he was late 40s or 50s. There was an awkward silence. I tried to just act like I was focused on trying to make a catch, but by now that wasn't even on my mind. This guy was weird. I didn't know what he wanted, and I was uncomfortable being so close to him. I felt him looking at me, or at least in my direction, as I faced halfway to the opposite direction of him. I took a quick glance to my right. Yeah, he was staring at me. I decided to be ballsy and lock eye contact with him. After about 4 seconds, he looked away. "So, where are you from?" I asked him. "Up there." He pointed behind himself, in the direction of the woodsy hill leading past the dirt road. "Oh, you live by Suffolk?" I asked. No, I'm not," he said. "What made you decide to come out here?" I said. "Why not?" I continued to try and uncomfortably fill the awkward silences that kept coming up. His responses were dry. He didn't contribute anything to what was barely a conversation. He just sat there not doing anything with half a smile on his face, looking either at me or in my general direction throughout. I was creeped out. My heart was racing at this point. I'd go as far as saying that I was nervous for my life. We were surrounded by trees in all directions in the middle of a pond. I started to row a bit closer to land, but in a very low-key kind of way, trying to play it off as me just trying to find a better spot to find some fish. I was horrified when I saw he was following me. "What a great day, huh?" I felt a shake in my voice. I got close enough to the edge of the pond where I finally told the man, "I think I'm gonna call it a day." I turned to see his reaction. He was still staring at me, but his smile was gone now. "I can't let you leave," he said. He lifted his flannel to expose a handgun sticking out of his jeans pocket. As soon as I could process what I was looking at, I dove out of the boat for land, ran the whole half-mile uphill through the woods back to my house, and locked every door and window as soon as I made it home. I pulled down the blinds to the dining room window, leaving it open just a crack for peeking outside undetected. It started to get dark out, and I left every light in the house off, still peeking out to the front yard, making sure I wasn't followed. The time came when I finally decided I wasn't followed. I realize now, like you, that not calling the police immediately was a huge mistake. I kept my bedroom windows open to let the room air out. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, so I wasn't worried about being watched through the window. About half an hour after shutting the light and falling under the covers, I heard the sound of leaves crunching from outside. I sat up to hear it more clearly. It was definitely something walking around out there. Normally I would assume it was a deer or a bear, but after what just happened, I was still in paranoia mode. I sat up as still as a statue, except for my shaking out of fear, waiting as the sounds of the steps stopped. "Hey buddy, you up there?" Are you trying to sleep? Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. I felt like 100 pounds just fell directly onto my chest. It was the same voice. I knew it right away. I didn't make a sound. I crept out of the room quietly downstairs to the kitchen and grabbed the phone, practically crawling on my way out to avoid being seen through the open blinds. I called 911 like I should have earlier in the temporary safety of my bedroom. I made sure to whisper into the phone as I was still hoping that he hadn't yet heard or spotted me. 20 minutes felt like an hour as I sat behind my bed, waiting for the police to arrive in constant fear that I would hear glass breaking from downstairs, or a thud on the back door, or even just a voice again from down below my window outside. The police did a thorough investigation of the property in nearby woods, turning up nothing. They suggested I stay with a friend or a family member for a few days, and so I did. I never heard from or saw the man again, but I still moved a month later. I couldn't deal with the constant fear and paranoia of being watched through my windows. I feel much more comfortable fishing out by the bay now. There was this one time I joined my brother-in-law Jack on a fishing trip with him, a couple of his friends, and my sister. He came from money, so he always had an easy life, and ever since my sister married him, it's been the same for her. I packed everything I would need to spend the night on his boat in a small backpack. I drove out to the wealthier side of town by his house, which was by the bay. He lived right by the water, like it was actually in his backyard. He even had a small pre-built wooden dock leading to his luxurious boat with the name Lexi painted on, which is my sister's name. He was inspired by Forrest Gump to do that. He's living the dream life, that much I'm sure. We set sail early in the morning. He had packed tons of food and snacks, lots of hamburger meat because unsurprisingly, they had installed a barbecue onto the boat. They have always had to have everything that cost money, and it's always been infuriating. To be honest, a few hours into the trip, it wasn't even as fun as I thought it would be. Only one largemouth bass had been caught, and that was of course by Jack. They were all getting really drunk. I tried to persuade my sister to let me drink, but she kept scolding me, saying no, since I was only 17 at the time. She was always a nagging buzzkill, and at that moment, I was questioning why I even agreed to go with them. The only part of the trip I was enjoying was being able to relax and tan on the back deck of his unnecessarily large boat. The sky started to turn a beautiful orange as the sun began to set. Jack put the burgers on the grill, which to me seemed odd. 3 fish had been caught by that time, which would have been a perfect, more appropriate dinner, but I would definitely prefer burgers over fish, so I didn't complain. By the time we were done eating, it was dark out. There was something so calming yet unsettling about being in the middle of the ocean at night. It's almost like being in space. Nothing around you as far as the eye can see, and without your vessel, you'd be as good as dead. They were all insanely drunk and or high by now, blasting music and screaming and laughing. They eventually invited me to play Cards Against Humanity with them inside, so I did. I didn't have anything else to do anyway. There was an extra beer sitting on the counter by the small bar, so I just grabbed it. I was long past the point of caring now, and my sister was not in a state of mind to be nagging me anymore. About 3 beers in, I was finally able to loosen up and enjoy myself with a decent buzz. I had to lower the music a good amount earlier because I couldn't even hear myself talking. Jack and his buddies were completely shit-faced now. My sister was drunker than I'd ever seen her, but she wasn't quite as bad as them. It was fine though, they were all adults trying to have a good time, safe and secluded on a boat in calm waters, far from any land where they could cause anyone any harm. But things took a horribly unexpected turn. Over the now much lower music, me and one of Jack's friends noticed a noise coming from outside. I turned off the music completely. There was the sound of 2 men calling for help from outside. We all rushed outside, or at least I rushed, to the side of the boat. There, over the ledge, was a much smaller boat with 2 Indian men looking up at us. I asked them what the problem was. One of them told us they were out of food and gas and needed help. I looked at everyone else. I didn't feel too good about this situation, but everyone else was not even close to a correct state of mind where they should be making important decisions. I felt like I had the burden of deciding what to do. Jack told them to wait there while he went to get the ladder. He tripped on his way and dropped his bottle of beer. I figured I would hate myself if I chose not to help two stranded seagoers, so I helped Jack in carrying the ladder over to the edge and hooking it to the railing. The two men climbed up on board and thanked all of us. Jack, my sister, and their friends couldn't even speak coherent sentences to the two men, so I had to apologize and told them they had a little too much to drink. The two men didn't even seem to acknowledge my statement. They looked at Jack and asked him if we had any extra food. We led them inside to the kitchen. Jack grabbed the leftover burgers from the counter and they shoveled them down. I didn't feel right about this situation. It made me uncomfortable. Jack clumsily handed them a jerry can full of gasoline, and the two men thanked us before climbing back down the ladder. I felt better now. We all went to sleep after that. Jack and my sister got the bedroom, while me and their two friends had to sleep on the pull-out cot and couches. I was rolling around the rock-hard couch for about an hour trying to get some sleep. I eventually had to get up to get a drink and use the bathroom. Jack told us to pee into the ocean to conserve the water on the boat. I opened the door expecting nothing but the sound of the calm water splashing, but instead, I heard the faint sound of a boat motor, along with the splashing of water that would come with a sailing boat. The pitch blackness surrounding the boat prohibited me from finding the source of the sound. I hopped up top by the controls and flipped on the switch for the searchlight. The beam of light provided the perfect amount to search the surrounding waters. Nothing so far. I turned it 90 degrees. Nothing. 180 degrees. Nothing. Then I reached about 3/4 of a whole spin around, and there was the boat from before. It was coming closer. And at that exact moment, I heard the gut-wrenching, blood-curdling scream of one of the guys from below. I jumped all the way back down to deck level and ran back inside. One of Jack's friends was standing in the corner of the room, while the other was sitting up in reaction to the scream. That was followed by Jack and my sister bursting out of the bedroom to see what was going on. He formed a barely audible sentence, saying he saw two figures standing over him. They apparently ran out the front door to the deck. We all ran to see if they were still there, but they were nowhere in sight. I pointed them in the direction of where I saw the boat. The searchlight was still aimed in that exact position, but by then the boat was already gone. We never managed to find them after that. We searched high and low for what they could have stolen. All that we found was missing were a couple of cans of gasoline and Jack's wallet and keys, which he had left on the kitchen table. We had to speed all the way back to Jack's house that night. It took 4 hours to make it back, but nobody had broken in. He used the spare key hidden in the backyard to get inside. Jack and my sister had the lock changed the next day. The scary part, a few weeks ago, their camera systems caught two suspicious men wearing hoods walk up to their front door and seemingly attempt to unlock it, but failing, then quickly running off. We're 99% sure it was them. I was 21 years old and I was fishing with my 84-year-old grandfather for the first time. We took an hour-long drive from our suburban home to a more desolate part of the state. He always went fishing in this one particular lake that no one knew about, where he always managed to leave with coolers full of fish. My grandpa was a hardcore fisher, I'll say that right now. I never even knew there were different terms for the steps of fishing. He was throwing terms at me that I didn't understand left and right, even during the car ride there, which finally ended when we veered off the main quiet road and down about 2 miles of dirt trails. He parked his Jeep at the side of the trail, and from there we lugged a small boat through some dense forest. At 84 years old, my grandpa was no weakling. In fact, I was becoming exhausted from carrying the boat, but I didn't want to show him that by asking to stop for a break, because that would just be humiliating if he could lift it longer than I could. I'll skip ahead to when we were actually sitting in the boat fishing. So he just got done showing me how to actually get the line and the hook in the water, After that, he didn't say a thing. He seemed to be concentrating really hard on what he was doing. I turned around to ask him a question. He seemed to be leaning in, focusing on something in the water. He didn't respond to my question, so I just resumed concentration on the water. I turned around like 20 seconds later out of curiosity, and he was leaning even closer now. I thought something was wrong with him. I put my hand on his shoulder, and that's when I heard splashing sounds. My grandpa seemed to push something back into the water, and then yelled at the top of his lungs for me to paddle as fast as I could back in the direction we came. My heart was racing. I didn't know what happened, but I knew it was something bad. As soon as the boat hit the dirt, my grandpa was moving as fast as he could off the boat and back to the car. We left the boat and equipment behind. When we got to the car, he stepped on it down the trails. All the while I was screaming at him to answer me, to tell me what happened. He seemed to have to gather his thoughts before finally, 10 minutes into the drive, saying, "I was looking down into the water. I knew I saw something. It kept getting closer to the surface. It became clearer as it got closer, and I could swear I saw what looked like a face. And then it got even closer, and as I was leaning in to get a better look, something reached out and grabbed a hold of me." That was the most I could get out of him until a few weeks later when he tried his best to describe what he saw, and from the description he gave, I remember it sounding almost like he was describing a human face. Almost. Perhaps I remember best his single sentence. All I know is, it wasn't no fish.
This happened 2 years ago on Halloween of 2023. I'm a 25-year-old male, but at the time of this story, I was 22. I had a long day of work due to a festival we had where we had parents bring their kids to the center for various activities, such as many different competitive games, a costume contest, trivia for candy, and a kids vs. parents dodgeball game. Overall, it was a very fun time, but it was definitely tiring. For context, I'm a community worker, so doing community events is pretty much what I do on a normal basis, but it's also draining if that makes sense. Anyway, after it was all done, I went home and was ready to call it a night. About an hour after I got home, it was around 6 something, my little sister called me. My sister, who I'll call Savannah, wanted me to take her and my nephew, who I'll call Jackson, trick-or-treating because neither our parents nor Jackson's parents felt like doing it. And as it usually goes, it fell on me to be the cool big brother to step in and make it happen. Savannah was 15 and Jackson was 11. Even though I wasn't feeling it at all, I got up, threw some clothes on, and headed to my parents' house to pick them up. Once I got there, I asked if they were ready, but Savannah was still finalizing her costume. She was dressed up as Raven from Teen Titans. She even had the white makeup on to give that ghostly appearance Raven usually has. Jackson was dressed as Sub-Zero from Mortal Kombat. Once Savannah was done, we got in the car and were on our way. I took them to a pretty busy neighborhood to make sure they got as much candy as possible. Upon arrival, we started going from house to house. Everyone we ran into was friendly and had plenty of treats to hand out. There was even one house where an older man gave them each a hot dog and a soda. He said every year for Halloween he doesn't hand out candy. He grills food instead because he'd rather give kids something with protein since it's good for the body. Honestly, we probably need more people like that. We passed a lot of other kids, and some gave compliments to Savannah and Jackson's costumes. I also saw some really cool costumes myself. Everyone in the area seemed to go all out. When we hit the last house for the night, we started walking back to the car. It was about a 10-minute walk since we had gone pretty far down the neighborhood. The neighborhood was less active now, and there weren't as many people out and about. That's why I got alarmed when I looked across the street and saw a person dressed in all black, standing in a yard where there were no porch lights on. I'm surprised I even noticed them at all, but I tend to always pay attention to my surroundings. When I looked closer, It seemed like the person was wearing a hooded cloak with an all-black outfit and a mask because I couldn't see their face at all. I honestly couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. Whoever it was, they appeared to be looking at us. I told Savannah and Jackson to stay close to me and said, "There's a suspicious person across the yard. Look, but don't stare." I said that so they could see who I was talking about without encouraging the person to approach or follow us. Jackson laughed and thought it was just someone trying to scare people walking by. Savannah, though, looked noticeably worried. Now, just to add some context, I was carrying a backpack with a Glock inside, and Savannah knew this, so when I told them to stay close, she probably realized I was being serious. Jackson was clueless. He's too young for me to tell him that I carry a real gun. As we were walking away, it looked like that person was still watching us, even though it was hard to tell in the dark. We were getting closer to the car when I suddenly heard heavy footsteps behind us, like boots hitting the concrete. I turned around and saw that same person again. Same outfit, all black, but this time I could see more clearly. They were wearing a tactical vest, tactical boots, and black pants tucked into the boots. They had on a full spandex mask that completely covered their face. That made the situation way more serious. When you see someone dressed like that, the first thing that comes to mind is that they're armed. He's following us, I thought. I whispered to Savannah and Jackson, "I need you both to listen very carefully. Do not stop walking and do not look back. The person I mentioned earlier is following us. They're behind us right now. The last thing we want is to alarm them or set them off, so just keep your composure and keep walking." I mainly looked at Jackson when saying this because he's younger and might not fully understand how serious this was. Savannah understood completely. We kept walking and did occasional glances behind us. The person stayed the same distance away but was still following. When we got to the car, they were still coming our way. That's when I decided to make a bold move. I pulled out my Glock and pointed it at the person. I asked why they're following us. The person raised their hands, as if they didn't expect me to do that, then slowly removed their mask. It was a woman, and she looked to be in her 30s. She took her mask off but didn't answer my question. She just stared at me blankly. I asked again, still pointing the gun, "Why are you following us?" What she said next made no sense. In an almost robotic tone, she said, "I'm an undercover cop. I was told there was a break-in, so I came to check it out. That's why I was standing outside that house. But when you looked at me funny, I assumed you were the one who did it. So it would be wise to lower that weapon, or I could have you arrested for threatening an officer of the law." I hesitated, but then lowered my gun. What else was I supposed to do? I didn't want to risk an arrest or ruin the kid's night, but her story didn't make any sense. She claimed she got word of a break-in, so why would she just stand outside facing away from the house? How did me looking at her funny make her think I was the one who did it? Why would I break into a house and then casually walk through the neighborhood? And why was she wearing a hooded cloak? All these questions were racing through my mind, so I asked her, "If you're undercover, why are you in tactical gear? Wouldn't that kind of give away that you're law enforcement? And what's the point of the cloak?" She didn't answer. She just stared at me again, but this time her expression changed. There was something malicious in her eyes, like she was irritated that I didn't believe her and was deciding what to do next. Jackson and Savannah stayed completely quiet through all of this. Then she smiled this creepy, unsettling smile and said, "If you didn't have that gun, this night would have ended a hell of a lot different for you." Right as she finished saying that, I noticed 4 figures suddenly emerge from between the houses, walking toward us. All of them were wearing tactical gear, but without the cloak. I instantly told Savannah and Jackson to get in the car, keeping my eyes on the woman and the figures. Once I saw they were in, I got into and drove off. As I was leaving, the woman was still standing there smiling. The others, 3 men and 1 woman, were not smiling. They had blank, emotionless faces, like they didn't even have souls. It's hard to explain. The whole car ride back was silent. I'm sure the kids were in shock just like I was. I dropped them off, made sure they got in safely, then went home to process everything that happened. The thing I couldn't shake off was why they targeted us. The neighborhood was full of people walking around, so why us? I wish I could say it ended there, but it didn't. A few days later, I got a text from an unknown number. It was just a photo, no words. The picture was of my car, taken in the parking lot of my apartment complex. I contacted the police and told them everything that happened on Halloween night. They took the report, but they couldn't investigate unless a direct threat was made. Typical. Out of curiosity, and maybe stupidity, I went back to that same house where I first saw that woman. I knocked on the door, and a man in his 40s answered. I asked if they'd experienced a break-in on Halloween night. He looked confused and said no. He said he went to bed early because he had work the next morning and didn't notice anything strange. I told him what I saw, and he had no idea what I was talking about. I thanked him for his time and left. At that point, I already knew the undercover cop story was fake, but I wanted to do my own little investigation just to make sense of it. Whoever that woman and those people were somehow knew my phone number and where I lived. It makes me wonder, was that not a random encounter after all? Were they watching me for a while? Were they planning something that night, and my being armed threw them off? All those thoughts messed me up and made me feel paranoid for a long time. I had to go to therapy and install a Ring camera at my front door just to feel safe again. In case you're wondering, I haven't been contacted by any unknown numbers since. Nothing else has happened since that picture. 2 years later, I still think back on that night. Writing this out helps me a lot, and I'm trying to fully move on from it. But if there's one thing I want people to take away from this, it's to always watch your surroundings. You never know who might be watching you. It's easy to get caught up in something dangerous just for existing, so always stay safe and protected, because I can say with full confidence that being armed that night probably saved our lives. This happened when I was 12 years old. It was Halloween day, and my family was staying at a small family resort about an hour away from where we lived. My parents wanted to do something different that year instead of just walking around our neighborhood for trick-or-treating. The resort was holding a Halloween celebration that weekend with a bunch of activities, games, and even a haunted hayride. It wasn't a big place. It had maybe 10 cabins, a main lodge, a small lake, and a long open field where they set up hayrides and games. It was surrounded by woods on all sides. During the day, it looked normal, even kind of peaceful, but once it got dark, the woods looked black and creepy, and the resort felt a little too quiet. We checked in early that afternoon. I remember walking into the cabin and feeling excited because I could smell campfire smoke and candy apples in the air. Kids were running around in costumes even though it wasn't dark yet. My parents said the hayride was starting around 7 and there'd be games before that, so I went off to play while they unpacked. They had booths where you could toss rings over bottles for candy, a costume contest, and even a pumpkin carving area. Everything was decorated with orange lights and fake spiderwebs. I met another kid around my age there. His name was Ryan. He was wearing a skeleton costume and said he and his parents were staying in the next cabin over from ours. We played a few games together and got a good amount of candy. As it got closer to 7, we saw a crowd of families walking over to the hayride area. The tractor pulling the wagon was parked near a big barn, and they had hay bales lined up inside for people to sit on. There were maybe 20 of us who got on. The driver wore a scarecrow mask, and there were workers dressed like zombies who would jump out during the ride to scare people. The ride started out fun. It was dark by then, and they had torches lighting the dirt trail. The tractor moved slowly through the woods, and every now and then, someone in a costume would appear from behind a tree or run up to the wagon. Most people laughed or screamed and then laughed again. It felt like a normal Halloween attraction, but about halfway through, something made me uncomfortable. We were passing through a part of the trail that was darker than the rest. The tractor slowed down, and I looked toward the edge of the woods on my side. That's when I saw a man standing just outside the torchlight. He wasn't part of the hayride cast. I could tell that right away. He wasn't wearing a costume that fit the theme. From what I remember, he had a black jacket, jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He was just standing there, not moving, with his hands in his pockets. At first, I thought maybe he was one of the workers taking a break, but he wasn't doing anything. He was only watching. At one point, I made eye contact with him, or at least I think I did. Even though his face was shadowed, I could feel his eyes locked on me. I turned to look at the people around me to see if anyone else noticed, but no one seemed to. When I looked back, he was still there, in the exact same position. I tried to ignore it for the rest of the ride, but I kept thinking about him. When the hayride ended and everyone got off, I looked back one more time toward the woods. He was gone. I didn't mention it to anyone right then. I figured maybe I imagined it or overreacted. We went back to the lodge where they had more games and food. My parents sat by a bonfire while Ryan and I went around collecting candy. Everything seemed normal again. About an hour later, I saw him again. Ryan and I were standing near the snack table when I noticed someone off to the side of the crowd. It was the same man. He wasn't close, maybe 30 feet away, but he was standing near the tree line, watching again. There were a lot of people around, so it felt strange that he'd just be standing there alone. I remember my stomach tightening when I realized he was looking in my direction. I tried to get a better look at his face, but it was hard because of the lighting. I could make out a short beard, and I think his hat had some kind of logo on it. I nudged Ryan and told him about the guy. Ryan looked over and said, "Maybe he's one of the workers." I said, "He's not. He was in the woods during the hayride." Ryan shrugged and said, "Maybe he's a dad." I wanted to believe that, but he wasn't talking to anyone. Just standing there. A few minutes later, when I looked back again, he was gone. Around 9 o'clock, if I had to guess, most of the little kids had gone back to their cabins. The event was winding down, but Ryan and I still had energy. We decided to walk around the resort before going in. There was a trail behind the cabins that led into the woods. Ryan said we should go a little way in to do something scary for Halloween before the night ended. I didn't want to go too far, but we had flashlights, and I didn't want to look like a coward. So we walked down the dirt path together, laughing and daring each other to keep going. The farther we went, the quieter it got. The sounds from the resort faded until it was just the crunching of our shoes on the path. We only went maybe 200 feet in when we stopped near a clearing. There was an old wooden sign nailed to a tree that said "Private Property." We started throwing small rocks at the sign and pretending to summon ghosts or something dumb like that. Then we both heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps coming from behind us, somewhere deeper on the path. We froze and turned around. Ryan whispered, "Probably another kid." But it didn't sound like a kid. Whoever it was walked with weight, like an adult. I shined my flashlight down the path. The light only went so far, and I couldn't see anyone yet. Then the footsteps stopped. For a few seconds, it was completely silent. Then a voice spoke. It said, "Hey there, boys." It was a man's voice, calm but somehow intimidating. Ryan looked at me, and I think he realized the same thing I did. It was the man from the hayride. He stepped into the light just enough for us to see part of him. Same black jacket and hat. "What are you two doing out here?" he asked. "You like candy?" Neither of us said anything. He pulled something out of his pocket and held it up. I could see the orange wrapper. It was a Reese's cup. "I got a bunch more of these in my cabin," he said. "Come on, I'll give you some." Ryan took a step back. I remember his face going pale. The man took a few steps closer and then said, "You don't have to be scared. It's Halloween, I'm just giving candy out. I saw you boys on the hayride earlier." When he said that, my stomach basically dropped. I grabbed Ryan's arm and whispered, "Run." We both turned and sprinted down the path toward the resort. I could hear him behind us for a second. His footsteps were pounding hard as he started to chase. I didn't dare look back. My heart was beating so hard it hurt. The path seemed longer than before. When we reached the edge of the woods, I could finally see the lights from the resort again. I yelled for help as we ran out of the trees and back toward the crowd near the bonfire. A few adults turned toward us, startled. We didn't stop until we got right up to the people. I turned around, expecting to see the man behind us, but he wasn't there. The path was empty. My parents came over right away, asking what happened. I told them everything, about the man watching me on the hayride, seeing him near the trees, and then following us into the woods. Ryan confirmed it all. My dad and another man grabbed flashlights and went to check the path, but they didn't find anyone. A few workers searched too, but he was gone. The resort staff called the local police to report what happened. They arrived about 30 minutes later and took statements from me, Ryan, and our parents. They said they'd check the area, notify nearby cabins to keep an eye out. That night, my parents didn't let me out of their sight. We stayed in the cabin with the door locked. I couldn't fall asleep for hours. Every noise outside made me jump. The next morning, the police came back and told us they searched the property but didn't find anyone matching the description. No vehicles had been reported missing, and no one fitting that man's description had checked in. They thought maybe he was a trespasser from outside the resort. We left later that day. I remember staring out the car window as we drove past the woods, half expecting to see him standing there again. For weeks after that, I kept thinking I saw him, on the side of the road, outside stores, even once at my school parking lot, but it was always someone else. Or at least, I hope it was. Ryan and I kept in touch for a while. He told me he couldn't sleep for days after it happened. Nothing ever came of this. The police never called again. The man was never identified or caught. Now I'm older, and when I think about that night, what scares me isn't what he did, it's what he could have done. If we had believed him for even a second, if we had walked toward him instead of running, I don't think I'd be here to tell this story. And every Halloween since then, whenever I see someone standing alone at the edge of a crowd, I always think of that man. Sometimes people who look like they're part of the fun are watching for a different reason.
My name is Roger, and this happened to me on Halloween night 3 years ago. I'm 29 and work a boring office job, but it's good pay. When this happened, I was getting stuck with the stuff. Beginner's time off, the shifts nobody wanted, etc. So when Halloween, my favorite holiday, rolled around, I was actually quite excited. It was never easy being the new guy at work, so I was wanting to enjoy a night of seeing kids be kids and chilling out at home watching movies. At the time, I was living alone in a small house on the outskirts of town with my girlfriend, but she was out of town with her parents. It wasn't isolated exactly. I had neighbors, but the street got really quiet once the trick-or-treating hours ended. The families in the area usually shut their lights off around 9 p.m. Since I didn't have kids, I just handed out candy until the crowd died down. On several past Halloweens, before I got my own place, I was quite used to the occasional ding-dong ditch prank. That's why there is a trick and treat here and there. That year, Halloween fell on a Saturday, and I remember it was chilly but clear out. By 10:30, I was lounging on my couch, half watching a horror movie while picking through a bowl of leftover candy. I hadn't seen anyone in about an hour, so when I heard a faint knock at my side door, I assumed it was stragglers. But when I opened the door, no one was there. Just the empty driveway and the faint rustling of leaves. I brushed it off. Kids play pranks all the time on Halloween. I headed back to my living room to finish watching The Conjuring 2. 15 minutes later, I heard the same sound again, only this time it was coming from the back door, the one that led to the small deck. That set off alarms in my head because nobody used that entrance. I froze in the living room, listening. The TV was off now, and I could hear it clearly. The metal rattle of the back doorknob being tested, slowly and cautiously. Whoever was trying my door was either checking if it was locked cautiously or believed it was unlocked and trying to be quiet. I crept into the kitchen, staying low, and that's when I saw him through the window. A man was crouched down near the door, wearing dark clothes and a cheap, cracked Halloween mask pushed up on top of his head. In his hand, he held a crowbar. He wasn't trying to hide. He was deliberate and calm, like he knew I was inside and didn't care. I backed away quietly and grabbed my phone, whispering to 911 what was happening. The operator told me to stay on the line, lock myself somewhere safe, and not to engage. I didn't want to make noise by slamming the doors upstairs, so I stayed crouched at the top of the steps, clutching a kitchen knife, whispering updates. I peeked down and saw the man move away from the back door. That's when I heard the faint pop of a window screen being pried off. He was at the basement window now. I whispered to the dispatcher, "He's at the basement." My voice was shaking. She told me officers were already on their way. Then came the worst moment. I heard glass crack. He was breaking the window. My blood ran cold, and it wasn't just a smash and grab. He knew I was there, and most burglars typically don't try to enter a home where they know someone's still inside. Minutes felt like hours. The dispatcher kept me talking quietly to make sure I was still okay. I heard footsteps crunching outside. The man was circling the house again. Then, headlights swept across the blinds. Relief flooded me as flashing red and blue lights pulled up in front. The man bolted. I watched him sprint across my yard, but he didn't get far. The officers tackled him just past my driveway. I didn't even realize I was shaking until I saw one of the cops leading him back in cuffs. That's when I saw what he'd been carrying: the crowbar, duct tape, and zip ties stuffed in his bag. This wasn't a burglar looking for valuables. This guy had a plan, and it was something far worse. The police told me he had a long record of breaking into homes, and that he was suspected in some other cases where people had gone missing. To this day, I hate being home alone on Halloween. It's supposed to be about scares and fun, but whenever I hear footsteps or knocking outside at night, I can't help but remember everything about this night. The part that chills me the most is if the police had been just 5 minutes later, I might not be here to tell the story. The police later followed up weeks later. They told me what they found in his backpack. He had a Colt .45 handgun, several kitchen knives, and rope.
When somebody goes hunting, they're normally right smack in the middle of a forest or the woods, completely devoid of other people. Seems like the perfect setting for a horror story, right? These 3 supposedly true stories will show you just what can go wrong while hunting. This first story was submitted to me in June by somebody named Robert Scherneman. His story takes place upstate New York, a place I'm familiar with. Here's his story. I've been a passionate hunter ever since my dad before me started taking me out on trips every Saturday, and I thought I would pass down the same tradition to my son. During the setting of this story, my son Peter was 10 years old. I figured that was a good age to introduce him to the world of hunting. I armed Peter and myself with Remington Model 798 sniper rifles, however I carried it until I found the spot where I usually find game. We could have used the deer hunting tower hidden deeper in the woods, but I figured that wouldn't be the best first-time experience. I handed him the gun when we were set up. I had already taught him the basics of firearms, so it wasn't like I was taking him out there with no experience. I chose to stay put the first time as it would be easier for him, and I figured I would move up to the more advanced methods of hunting in the future sessions. There was a lot of waiting, more waiting than usual in this certain spot. I could see Peter was getting bored, constantly yawning and sighing, and that disappointed me. I didn't want him to think this sport was that boring, so I packed up our stuff and told him we're moving. He seemed to perk up a bit with excitement, and that made me happy. As soon as we began walking, I heard footsteps. I put my arm in front of Peter silently and motioned for him to raise his gun. He did with excitement, until I spotted someone's head peer out from around a tree in the distance. I pushed the gun down immediately, a bit disappointed, but also relieved that Peter didn't shoot. I gave him a quick little apologetic wave, and with that, he disappeared back behind the tree out of sight. Was he another hunter? I couldn't tell, but from what I saw of him, even in the distance, there was something off-putting about his face. I couldn't put my finger on what it was at that moment. Seeing somebody this deep into the woods was rare and also strange, and this guy didn't exactly look like a hunter. So, as a safety precaution, I suppose, I steered Peter in the other direction. Still no sign of any deer. Peter asked me about the man, like who I thought he was, for example, as expected, and I just told him I didn't know, and I didn't think we should get closer. I didn't want to lie to him. A few minutes later, Peter started complaining that he was hungry. I was getting pretty hungry myself, so we stopped and unpacked our snacks. I was extremely disappointed that nothing had happened by now. While eating my sandwich, I heard footsteps again in the distance. Peter did too, as he immediately picked up his rifle and pointed it in that direction. I felt my heart drop when I could see the same man from before peering out from another tree at us. I lowered Peter's gun again, and I noticed he seemed a bit uncomfortable now, as was I. I told him to wait there while I began to walk over to the man, trying to emotionally prepare myself to confront him. About halfway over, I stopped and thought to myself, what the hell am I doing? My son is right over there. I turned around and hurried back to Peter, telling him it's time to go. If you had your son in the middle of the woods and you thought you were being stalked, odds are you would just want to get out of there too. We were not running, we were merely walking back to the road. I was mentally waiting for a twig snap or a leaf crunch from behind us, and when it happened, I nudged Peter to go along ahead. I angrily turned around and stormed towards the man, who was once again peering from behind a tree. I'd say when I got within 30 feet from the tree, he moved back behind the tree out of sight, and then I heard a thud, as if something were just dropped onto the ground. I had my gun loaded in my hand as I cautiously walked up to the tree. I didn't even say a word. I don't know why. All I did was slowly creep up to the tree, and when I got there, I felt as if everything around me had completely collapsed, or rather ceased to exist, and all that I could focus on was the head laying face first on the ground in front of me. No body, just head. I didn't even look up or around the tree to see who had dropped it there. I just full on sprinted back to Peter and told him to run. We made it back home safely within 5 minutes, and I made 100% sure we weren't followed. However, I stayed up the whole night keeping watch for the sake of my family's safety. I found out the next day through my wife that there had been 2 disappearances of local hunters, and that's when I called the police and reported what I had experienced. I had to, of course, play it safe for a long time, at least a few months, before taking my son out again. What baffles me, though, is how this person managed to kill 2 hunters who obviously had to be armed with some kind of weapon. I have since resumed hunting with my son. The next story was submitted to me just a month ago by Nathan Zielinski, and it's more of a mix between a camping and a hunting story. Here it is. It was my first time hunting. I was 21, going with my friends Anthony, Christian, Tom, and his girlfriend Diana to some park in Colorado to go elk hunting. We brought 2 separate tents that were relatively large, sleeping bags, 2 days worth of food and drinks, and of course, guns. I couldn't even tell you the name of the gun Anthony handed me. It was just a basic looking hunting rifle. Honestly, I didn't know how I felt about the whole thing. Killing a living, breathing animal that has just as much of a will to live as me, merely for so-called fun, didn't seem cool to me. But it was like the 5th time Anthony offered, and I felt like I had to say yes. I decided I wouldn't shoot any animals about halfway through the car ride. Anthony pulled into a lot, we unpacked the car, and proceeded to hike about a mile into the woods before setting up camp. First thing after setting up camp, we all followed Anthony's lead as he proudly babbled on about hunting techniques. I wished I had someone to laugh about it with, but everyone else seemed serious about it as well. I tried busting Anthony's chops by asking him, wouldn't it be better to stop talking if you don't want to scare away any potential prey? He got pissed. I could tell he took this really seriously, and from there on, I shut up. And by there on, I mean however long things were going normal, and that wasn't long. During our hunt, we ran into a rather strange group of people. 3 rather large, dirty men with long, sticky hair. They looked like they belonged to some kind of inbreeding house deep in the woods. They looked at us and sort of nodded their heads as if to say hello as we passed by them, one by one. We were officially freaked out. It might sound like something that would be laughable, but under the circumstances, it was horrifying. We were deep in the woods, far from the lot, which was, for the record, completely empty, and it may sound exaggerated, but these 3 looked like creepy lowlives who could be dangerous. Thankfully, though, they didn't follow us, which allowed for us to peacefully go on with our hunt. Anthony ended up killing a deer. We didn't find any elks. We dragged the deer all the way back to our campsite, and that was actually our dinner for the night. Anthony and Tom went through a disgusting, bloody process of skinning, and I'm pretty sure gutting the deer, but I didn't watch for more than a few seconds. Anthony made us venison burgers. He came prepared with the buns and everything. While I didn't particularly agree with the sport, I was impressed with Anthony. We went to sleep first thing at dark with the fire still going outside. I was having a really bad time trying to get comfortable in that sleeping bag. Anthony and Christian seemed to fall asleep quickly, while I, on the other hand, had to be rolling around for at least 2 hours. I've always had a hard time falling asleep in sleeping bags. I was actually about to get up and go outside to pee, when I heard footsteps coming from outside the tent. I opened my mouth to call out Tom or Diana's name, but I realized, what if it wasn't them? I laid silently and listened. In an unexpected instant, the zipper to our tent got pulled down, and I threw my head down to the side and acted as if I were asleep. There was a short pause before the zipper got pulled back up. I waited until the pairs of footsteps moved away. They seemed to be moving to Tom and Diana's tent. Then I realized it must have been them, and they must have been checking if we were asleep so they could, mess around, I guess. So I decided to play a little joke on them. I gave it about 5 minutes before I unzipped the tent and began creeping over to their tent. Then I realized their zipper was still undone. That's strange, I thought to myself. I crept over expecting to scare the two lovebirds, but instead, when I got close enough, I saw two men inside of the tent doing something to Diana. At that moment, I screamed as loud as I could, mostly out of fear, but also to wake everyone up. Anthony and Christian stormed out from the tent with their rifles. When the two men fled from the tent, I realized something. They were the same two men we had seen earlier. Tom and Anthony fired rounds in their direction to scare them off. However, something even more horrifying happened after that. After they shot their rounds, we all looked around us completely horrified as men in almost all directions who were previously hiding in bushes and behind trees were taking off in different directions. We tried waking up Tom and Diana, but they seemed to have been injected with some kind of tranquilizers by the men. We had no choice but to wait until they woke up, which took about maybe half an hour. Running back to the car in that pitch-black forest was one of the most horrifying moments of my life. We don't know who all those people were. They could have been part of some secluded inbreeding house for all we knew, or even some kind of cannibalistic family. We have no idea what they were planning on doing with Tom and Diana, but we're just happy we all got out of there safely. This last story was written by Jared the Sprinter, and he shares his night hunting experience. I was doing some night hog hunting in the woods near my backyard. I was hiding in the tower I had built about a decade ago. In case anyone's wondering, I of course had a night vision scope attachment. I guess I'm what you would consider a hardcore hunter. I don't want to bore you with the unnecessary story prolonging details, so I'll make this short. And I want everyone to know that though I agree this story sounds far-fetched and crazy, it is nothing but the truth. And I in a way actually consider myself lucky that I'll always have such a horrifying story to share. So, while I was sitting in the tower waiting for movement, it finally came. I took aim and found the source. But it wasn't at all a hog, or any kind of animal I was expecting. It was a person, a man wearing all black. Black sweatpants, black shoes, and a black hoodie with the hood over his head. But that wasn't the freakiest part. He was dragging a sack behind him. My heart started racing. I was pretty sure I was witnessing this guy trying to bury a body. I continued to watch him, but then he slowed down, and I swear to God, it looked as if he turned his head up to me. I ducked down under the wooden walls of the tower, shaking in my boots. Yes, I had a gun, but just the idea of using it against a person is horrifying. I lay low, praying to God that he hadn't seen me. It wouldn't make sense if he could, though. It's practically pitch black out here, or at least that was my logic. Seconds felt like an eternity as I waited for the footsteps in the leaves to move elsewhere, but I didn't hear any footsteps. All I heard was the sound of a foot hitting one of the wooden planks on the ladder of the tower. I felt the entire tower vibrate and shake as there were two more steps moving up the ladder. At this point, I was asking myself deep down, am I going to be able to shoot someone? But for some reason, whoever was down there decided not to climb all the way up, as I heard them jump back down to the forest ground and began dragging the sack away. I think I stayed frozen like a statue for at least 10 minutes before even peeking over the ledge again. The coast seemed clear. I had to get home and warn the police immediately. I hopped over the ledge and descended down the ladder. I turned on my pocket flashlight, which in hindsight was a stupid move considering the situation, and ran back in the direction of my house. I was only able to run for about 10 seconds or so when I heard the rapid, manic footsteps crunching the leaves from behind me. I took a look over my shoulder, and there he was, inches away from my face. I spun around and shot him in the shoulder. He stopped and screamed in agony, and I took that moment to finish my dash to my house. Again, in hindsight, I should have held him hostage somehow, but that doesn't even matter now. I called the police, who showed up within 15 minutes with a whole search squad, and I led them all into the woods to the exact location where I shot him. There was a faint yet noticeable blood trail spilled onto the leaves, which led past the body bag, which the cops seized, and eventually right to the maniac, who was hiding under a log next to a tree. He was arrested and tried for the murder of Jinkwen Sakanaki, a Japanese corner store owner. I don't know the full story behind it, but I do know I won't forget this one for the rest of my life, and I'll also be telling it for the rest of my life.
I'm 29 now, and I've had a lot of horrific experiences, but nothing sits in my brain the way one night from when I was 15 does. It was my first real babysitting job that wasn't just watching a cousin for an hour while my aunt ran to the store. This was a family friend, the kind where your parents know their parents, and everyone assumes it's basically safe by default. They're cool with me telling this story online, so their names are Mark and Diane, and their son Charlie was 5. They lived in a nice house in a quiet, normal neighborhood. Looking back, that's part of why it messed with me. It didn't feel like the kind of house where anything bad could happen. It felt like a normal place, like where I grew up. It was a Friday night in early fall. My parents dropped me off around 6:30, and Mark and Diane were already dressed up. Mark shook my hand like I was applying for a job at his office, and Diane kept calling me a lifesaver. Mark and Diane went over the basics, like when we eat, what we eat, when his light's out, and keeping his door cracked open. If he has to use the bathroom, walk him there, because he sometimes gets scared in the hallway at night. Mark also pointed out the locks. There was a front door lock they never used because they came in through the garage. The back door, though, was the one I'd use if I needed to step out onto the deck. He mentioned I'd have to lock both the locks, and he pointed to the deadbolt up top and the regular doorbell lock underneath. I nodded like I understood. I thought it was obvious. I thought a lock was a lock. They left around 7. As soon as their car pulled away, Charlie asked if we could play board games and hide and seek, and the hide and seek I tried to talk him out of because the house was bigger than I expected, and I didn't want him hiding somewhere stupid and getting hurt. We compromised by playing a simple card matching game at the coffee table, then a video game on the little console in the family room. It was one of those kids games where you basically just run around collecting stuff and the character can't really die. Around 7:45, I heated up the food Diana had left. It was mac and cheese and chicken nuggets, basically babysitter cheat code. Charlie ate in front of the TV, which his parents probably didn't normally let him do, but I wasn't trying to be the strict babysitter on my first paid job. After dinner, we brushed his teeth and went to his room. His room was on the 2nd floor. The house had this wide hallway that ran past a couple bedrooms and a bathroom. Charlie's room was at the end, and it had a small closet with sliding doors. Inside, from what I could tell earlier when he grabbed a toy, it was mostly little kid clothes and some storage bins on the top shelf. His room had a hamper in the corner by his dresser, one of those tall ones with a lid. There was a nightlight on his dresser that glowed soft yellow. I tucked him in and read him a short book, and as I was walking out, he asked if I'd stay in the hallway for a minute. I stood outside his door and listened to him rustle around for maybe 30 seconds. Then his voice went quiet, and I figured he was settled. I left his door cracked like they said. Diane had showed me the guest bedroom where I could hang out once Charlie was asleep. It was down the hallway from Charlie's room, closer to the stairs. It had a small TV, like a spare room TV, and a bed with a comforter that looked like it was never used. I turned the TV on and flipped through the channels until I found some random show. I lay on top of the bed, shoes off, phone in my pocket. It felt like the job was basically done, but that lasted maybe 40 minutes. I was half watching the TV when I heard soft footsteps in the hallway. I looked up, and Charlie was standing in the doorway of the guest room. He was rubbing his eyes and holding his stuffed animal. His face didn't look sleepy though, he looked scared. I asked what was wrong. He didn't come in at first, he just whispered, "Chris." I motioned him over, and he walked in slowly, like he didn't want to turn his back to the hallway. He said he heard something in his closet. I tried to assure him it was likely a house settling noise, that houses creak a lot. He shook his head fast, saying no, it was more like a scratch. I still knew it had to just be typical toddler imagination. I told him there were no monsters in his closet and asked if he wanted me to check. He nodded, and I walked him back to his room. I turned his light on fully and looked at the closet. The sliding doors were closed. I slid one open and peeked inside. Admittedly, I took just a quick peek because I knew no one was in there, and I just saw a bunch of clothes. I even pushed some clothes aside like I was actually searching. I slid the door closed and saw relief on his face. I tucked him back in and went back to the guest room, but 15 minutes later, I heard footsteps again. This time Charlie came in quicker, and he was more upset. He said, "Chris, the closet door moved." I sat up and tried not to show annoyance, even though I felt it for a second. I tried to stay patient. I said, "Okay, let's go check." We walked back down the hallway, and when we got to his room, I stopped in the doorway. The closet door was fully open. One of the sliding panels was pushed all the way to the side. I stared at it for a second, and I remember my stomach doing this little drop, not because I thought someone was in there right away, but because it didn't match what I remembered. I knew I closed it. I looked at Charlie and asked why he opened that in a tone that would imply I'm not happy, but the way he swore he didn't, it didn't come across like he was lying. I walked over and slid the closet door shut, but the thing is, the way it closed, it didn't feel like it could have drifted open on its own. I gave Charlie a look meant to imply that I knew he was playing around with the door, maybe trying to scare me. I tucked him back in and told him he was fine and to go to sleep. I left the room, and on the way back to the guest bedroom, I caught myself listening for sounds behind me, like someone was walking in the hallway. I told myself to stop being stupid. I was 15 in a family friend's house on a safe street. About 10 minutes later, instead of footsteps, I heard Charlie call out. It wasn't a scream, but rather a shaky raised voice like he was trying not to yell but needed me. It came from his room. I got up and walked out. As I got closer, I could hear him crying softly. I stepped into his room and saw him sitting in bed with tears on his face. I immediately looked at the closet. The door was closed. That should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. I said, "Hey buddy, what happened?" He didn't answer right away. He just lifted his arm and pointed toward the corner of the room. I followed where he was pointing, and for a second, my brain didn't process what I was seeing. There was a hamper in that corner, and behind it, pressed into the narrow space between the hamper and the wall, was a person crouched down. They were hiding, trying to make themselves as small as possible. The first thing I saw was a shoulder, then the shoes, then his partially hidden face, but I could see his eyes looking straight at me. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 seconds before my body reacted. I didn't scream, I simply decided it was time to move, so I grabbed Charlie with both arms, yanked him out of bed, and picked him up like he weighed nothing. I backed toward the door, never taking my eyes off that corner. The person surprisingly didn't move at first. They stayed crouched, as if they stayed still enough we'd forget he was there. I ran us toward the guest room and locked the door. I did my best to keep Charlie quiet as I called 911. I told the operator there was someone in the house. I gave the address and said I was babysitting, and there was a man in the kid's room. The operator asked if the intruder had a weapon. I said I didn't know. She asked if we were safe. I said we were locked in a bedroom upstairs. She told me to stay on the line. I kept expecting the doorknob to start turning or expecting the door to shake. The operator kept talking to me to keep me calm, asking me to describe the person, but I couldn't. All I could say was I saw the person's eyes hidden behind a hamper. The eventual sound of distant sirens getting closer was the first time I was ever relieved to hear police sirens in my life. The operator told me to wait until an officer came to my door and identified themselves. When the police finally came upstairs, one of them knocked and said, "Chris?" because I guess dispatch had my name. I unlocked the door and opened it, and 2 officers were there with flashlights. They looked past me into the room, then at Charlie. They had already done a sweep downstairs and didn't see anyone. They didn't have to kick the door down because the front door was wide open. They checked every possible hiding spot in the house. Whoever it was had left. They said based on the timeline, he probably slipped out fast when I ran, went down the stairs, and ran out the front door. When Mark and Diane got home, they arrived to the police cars outside and officers in their living room. A lot of emotions filled the room for sure. Mark asked me questions I couldn't really answer, just like the police did. A cop asked about the locks and entry points. Mark immediately went to the back door and checked it. I followed because I felt like I needed to see. The deadbolt at the top was unlocked. Mark looked at me and asked, "Did you lock both locks like I said?" I said, "I locked the bottom one." He said the bottom one pops if the knob gets jiggled. That's why he told me both. He wasn't raising his voice, but I knew he was upset. However, he didn't stay upset for long and was grateful I saved Charlie from danger. The worst part is thinking about what would have happened if Charlie hadn't come to get me, if he'd stayed in his room trying to be brave while that person was in there, or if I'd been downstairs messing around on my phone, not paying attention, or if I'd told Charlie to go back to bed without checking. So to parents or babysitters or anyone out there who takes care of kids, don't always dismiss the things they say as just their imagination. The third time I babysat AJ was the only time I was ever asked to stay overnight at someone else's house, and it's also the last time I ever babysat for anyone at all. I was 17, a senior in high school, and I had already watched AJ twice before. He was 8, quiet, and the kind of kid who didn't really look at you when you talked to him. The first time I met his mom, she told me he was a loner and mostly kept to himself, so I shouldn't expect much interaction. She said that like it was a good thing, like it meant the job would be easy, and honestly, the first 2 times kind of were. I barely had to do anything besides heat up food and remind him when it was time to get ready for bed. He'd just sit in his room playing video games like Grand Theft Auto for hours. The third time was different because his mom asked if I could spend the night. She said she had to be out of town for work and wouldn't be back until late the next morning. She sounded stressed on the phone, like she didn't have many options, so I said yes. I figured it would be the same as before, just longer and more money. When I got to the house that afternoon, she rushed through the instructions at the kitchen counter while AJ was already upstairs. She said there was frozen pizza in the freezer, and he usually fed himself breakfast cereal, and I could sleep in the extra room at the end of the hallway. She thanked me like 3 times before she even left. When she did, I called up the stairs to let AJ know I was there, even though he already knew, and he just yelled back a short "yeah" without coming down. For the next few hours, I barely saw him. I could hear the video games through the ceiling, the sounds of gunshots and cars crashing in his game. At one point, I went upstairs to check on him and found him sitting on the floor of his room, controller in hand, eyes locked on the screen. He didn't look away when I asked if he was okay. He just nodded while staring at the TV. I went back downstairs and tried to watch something in the living room, but it felt weird being in someone else's house overnight. Around 7, I made the pizza and called AJ down. When he came down, he didn't say hi or anything. He just grabbed 2 slices, looked at me with this expression I still can't fully describe, like I'd done something to annoy him just by existing, and then went back upstairs without a word. He was acting unfriendlier than usual this time. I stood there in the kitchen holding my own plate, feeling awkward and kind of unwelcome in a house I was supposed to be in charge of for the night. I figured he was just a weird kid and didn't take it personally. After I cleaned up, I went upstairs to get ready for bed. The guest room was basic and small. I left the door half open because I didn't like the idea of being fully closed in. I was sitting on the bed talking to my friend Bree when I got this strange feeling like I was being watched. I looked up and saw AJ's head slowly move back out of view from the crack in the doorway. He had just been standing there looking in. I laughed a little because it startled me more than anything, and I called out to him, asking what he was doing. He didn't answer. I heard soft footsteps go down the hallway toward his room. I remember thinking it was kind of funny, like he was just being a nosy kid, and I didn't think much of it after that. Around 11, I put my phone down and turned off the lamp. I rolled onto my side and closed my eyes, trying to fall asleep. I don't know how much time passed before I felt like I wasn't alone in the room. I opened my eyes and saw a dark shape at the foot of the bed. It took a few seconds for me to process that it was someone standing there. I let out a scream before I could stop myself and scrambled for the lamp. When I turned it on, I saw AJ standing at the end of the bed, completely still. The look on his face is still hard to describe. He looked annoyed, yet also scared or regretful of what he was about to do. Both of his hands were behind his back. I sat up and asked him what he was doing in there. He didn't answer. I told him to show me what he had behind his back. He shook his head no, still not breaking eye contact. That scared me more than if he yelled or cried. I got out of bed and moved toward him, telling him he needed to go back to his room. When I reached him, I grabbed his arm and turned him slightly, and that's when I saw the handle of a large kitchen knife in his hand. That's when I screamed again and covered my mouth with my hand without even meaning to. I yelled at him to get out of the room, to go, to leave. My whole body was shaking. He didn't argue, he just ran out into the hallway, still holding the knife. I rushed to the door, slammed it shut, and locked it. I fumbled with my phone, trying to call his mom because my hands were actually shaking. When she answered, I could barely get the words out. I told her AJ came into my room with a knife while I was sleeping. There was a long silence on the other end. Then her voice changed completely. She sounded horrified, like she had been expecting something bad, but not this bad. She kept apologizing over and over, saying she was so sorry and that she believed me. I told her I couldn't stay there. I didn't care about the money or anything else. I just needed someone else to come watch him. She didn't argue at all. She said she would call her ex-husband and have him come right away. I stayed locked in that room for almost an hour, scared shitless. Eventually, there was a knock at the front door and a man's voice calling AJ's name. I cracked the guest room door and saw a man I recognized from a photo in the house. He went straight down the hall toward AJ's room without saying much to me. I grabbed my bag, walked past them without looking into AJ's room, and left the house as fast as I could. His mom sent me the money through Venmo later that night, along with another long apology, but I never went back there. I never even babysat for another family after that. I feel like I was actually close to becoming a news article online about a babysitter getting murdered by a child. I was 21 when my sister asked me to watch her kids overnight while she and her husband went to a wedding a few hours away. I'd babysat my niece Emma and my nephew Lucas plenty of times before, so it wasn't a big deal. Emma was 6, quiet and sensitive, and Luke was 9, more talkative but still easy. They live in a normal suburban house in a quiet neighborhood not far from our childhood home. My sister walked me through the usual routine before they left, since this time I'd be staying overnight. Leftover Chinese food for dinner, and no scary shows, and bed by 9. She reminded me Emma sometimes got nervous at night and might call for me once or twice. After they left, the kids and I ate in the living room and watched a movie. It felt like a completely normal night. Around 9, I took them upstairs. Their bedrooms were across the hall from each other, with a bathroom in between. I tucked Emma in first. She asked if I'd leave her door open a little and keep the hallway light on. Lucas just rolled over and told me goodnight like he was already half asleep. I went downstairs and turned on the TV, keeping the volume low so they wouldn't hear. Around like 9:30 to 10, I heard footsteps upstairs. I figured Emma needed something. I started up the stairs, but before I got halfway, I saw her walking along the balcony toward the top step. She was standing there in her pajamas looking down at me. I asked what was wrong. She said I already came in her room and told her to go back to sleep, but she hadn't been able to. I stopped on the stairs and told her I hadn't been upstairs since I put them to bed. She thought I was joking at first. She said I stood in her doorway a few minutes ago and told her everything was fine in a whisper. I told her maybe she was dreaming it and walked her back to her room. I checked her closet and under the bed, even though I knew nothing would be there. She finally settled back in, but she kept watching me as I left, like she wasn't convinced. I went back downstairs, feeling slightly uneasy, but still telling myself kids mix dreams with reality all the time. About 20 minutes later, Lucas came down, rubbing his eyes. He asked why I came into his room. I felt a chill go through me. I told him I didn't. He said I stood by his dresser and looked at him, then walked out without saying anything. I tried to keep my voice calm and told him he must have been half asleep, but now this was weird, because both of them said pretty similar things. Instead of going back to bed, he stayed next to me on the couch now. That was when I started to really listen to the house. Every small sound felt louder. I turned the TV off, and the silence literally made my ears ring. Lucas noticed me doing this, and I think it started to scare him when I told him to shush for a second. I heard something upstairs. It was light footsteps running, and then I saw her running across the balcony upstairs and then racing down the stairs, screaming Uncle Dan a bunch of times. When she got to the living room, I asked her what's wrong, and she started crying, saying there's someone upstairs. I think this was around the time my heart really started racing. They weren't playing a little kid prank on me. She was crying genuine tears. I asked her why she thought there's someone upstairs, and she responded saying someone came in her room again and said goodnight, but it didn't sound like me. I think by now, I was internally freaking the fuck out, but I told them to keep calm. I didn't want Emma to cause Lucas to start crying now too. I told them to wait down here, I'll go check upstairs and be right back. And that's exactly what I planned to do. But I wasn't going up there without a weapon at this point. I went to the kitchen, secretly grabbed a knife, and placed it in front of me as I walked back into the living room and then up the stairs. The kids were still on the couch. I made it to the upstairs balcony that overlooks the living room. I did a little march as I walked across it to try to make them laugh, but it didn't work. As I passed the balcony and into the upstairs foyer that led to the kids' bedrooms, I can't iterate enough just how much I wasn't expecting what happened next. I heard something in Emma's room. I peered inside and thought I saw something or someone. I quietly said hello so the kids wouldn't hear, but I wasn't expecting someone to respond. In a very weird, high-pitched voice, yet still sounding like a grown man, someone said, "Aren't they just so special?" The voice sounded like it belonged to someone with mental issues, maybe not fully there. I then realized what I was seeing in the bedroom was a really tall person standing next to Emma's bed now. I guess like 6'4", they looked to be like 6 inches taller than me. My heart was in my throat. I turned and ran down the stairs and grabbed the kids. I told them, "Put your shoes on now, we're leaving," and Emma started to cry even more. I quickly saw why. Peering around the wall up the balcony upstairs was this grotesque-looking man doing peekaboo with his hands toward the kids. I said forget the shoes and ran the kids outside with me in their socks. We ran to a house a couple doors down where I saw lights on inside, and I rang the bell 5 times. The lady who answered knew Lucas and Emma. I introduced myself and quickly explained the situation. She let us in immediately into safety. I got on the phone with 911 and stood on the front porch of this couple's house watching my sister's house. And as I saw that man casually strolling out of her house, walking down the walkway into the darkness of the street in the opposite way, the 911 operator told me not to engage him in any way and that officers would be there soon. but boy do I regret listening to that operator. I should have followed that fucking creep down the street. I should have been a man and beaten him to a pulp. But realistically, I didn't know if he was armed or not, and based on his voice, I choose to believe it was some mentally handicapped person who simply walked right into the house. I stayed on the stoop watching the man until he disappeared down an intersecting street, and I told the operator which street it was. She kept making it seem like the cops would be heading down that direction, but it took so long for them to arrive that by then, that man was gone, possibly into one of the houses in the vicinity for all anyone would know. I wasn't happy with the response time, and I let the police know that. I went into my sister's house with them to investigate, and nothing seemed out of the sorts, nor was anyone else inside. Of course, given the circumstances, I drove the kids home to my parents' house with me that night to sleep there. We weren't going to sleep in that house that night regardless. And of course, there was somehow blame put on me that the one night I was watching them, someone breaks into the house. However, I firmly believe that man was in there before I even got there. I did not go needlessly unlocking doors or anything like that. Ever since then, my sister and my brother-in-law have been nuts with the security cameras. They have at least 6 all over the house, inside and out. But honestly, who can blame them after this?
Dogs are called man's best friend for a reason. They will sacrifice themselves if it means saving the ones they love. Here are 3 horrifying stories that would have turned out tragic had a dog not been around. Number 3. I had to watch after my sister when my parents were out one night. I wouldn't be out anyway though. I was busy playing the current hit game that had just come out at the time. My dog Sheriff was laying next to me when he lifted his head up and his ears twitched. You know, that thing that dogs do when they hear something. I paused the game to see if I could hear what he was listening for. I didn't hear anything and lost interest, assuming it was someone walking their dog outside or something. Sheriff jumped off the bed and ran out the half-open door to the bedroom. He was barking, going crazy at something. I didn't care to follow him. I simply yelled at him to shut up. But eventually, his normal annoying barking suddenly turned crazed and defensive, as if he were confronting something or someone. That's when I got suspicious and ran to go see what it was. I heard a Sheriff's nails scrape the basement steps as he flew down the stairs. My heart sank as I realized he must have been chasing something. I found myself standing at the top of the basement steps for a whole minute, staring into the darkness below, gathering up the courage to go down there. I finally did, turning the light on the way down. Sheriff was standing by the door to the laundry room. I didn't even dream of opening that door. I trusted in him enough to believe that someone was in there. I struggled, but eventually picked him up and ran with him all the way back upstairs. As I was about to shut the light, I heard the sound of the laundry room door creaking open. At that instant, I slammed the basement door shut and locked it. I listened for a few moments with my ear against the door, and I could hear, barely over the sound of Sheriff barking, the sound of the steps squeaking. I dove for the phone and called the police. When they arrived, they caught him trying to bust out through the basement window. Me and my sister watched as the officers walked him out to the car, and I'll never forget the dreadful stare the man gave me as he was forced into the back seat of the police car. But I'll also never forget how grateful I was to have Sheriff with me that night. Number 2. I used to have a Beagle Pointer mix before she passed away at the age of 11. Her name was Mandy, and she was the sweetest and most loyal dog a person could ask for. She would never harm a fly, but she did have a big troublemaking mouth. So the story goes, I was 15 years old, getting ready for sleep one night like any other night. Mandy slept in my room, and when I walked into my room, finally ready to crash in bed, I was greeted to Mandy growling. She wasn't looking at anything in particular. I playfully asked her what was wrong, and she just made an annoyed doggy sound before putting her head down. I found it funny. For the good hour of me rolling around trying to fall asleep, Mandy would constantly break the silence with growling. I would peek at her, but she would still have her head down. She showed no reaction to me offering to take her out, so I could check that off the list. It quickly went from cute and funny to just annoying, but I eventually fell asleep. I woke up to see that it was 2 a.m. and Mandy was growling. I tried to adjust my eyes in the dark, and I could eventually see Mandy standing in the middle of the room. She was looking up at my closet door. I felt my heart begin to race. What I was witnessing was flat out disturbing. I turned on the lamp and watched as Mandy continued to stare up at the elevated closet. I don't know what I was thinking, but I decided to open up the closet and check what she was barking at. I want to note right now I have one of those closets that lead to an attic. When I checked, there was nothing in the closet, but I noticed the attic door was cracked open. You can imagine the fear in my body as I ran to my parents' room to get my dad. He didn't seem to take me too seriously until he got to my room and saw Mandy growling and looking up in my closet. My dad is a big guy, so he went in there without a weapon. I sat there, worried for what was to come next. What came next was my dad screaming at the top of his lungs at somebody. I heard boxes fall over and glass shatter as my dad moaned in apparent pain. Somebody was rushing out of the closet. I hoped it was my dad, but instead, some 6'5" man with a hammer in his hand jumped out from the closet and passed me. What happened next still surprises everyone. Mandy jumped up and grabbed a hold of the man's arm with her teeth. The scream of the unfamiliar voice filled the room. My dad came rushing out of the closet just in time to jump onto the intruder, taking him down. He sent my mom to fetch my little brother's prop handcuffs. My dad held him down while I handcuffed him. Thankfully, he was sent to jail. I don't know what his intentions were, but obviously if he had a hammer with him, he probably wasn't just planning on robbing us. If we didn't have Mandy at that time, I could only imagine what would have happened to our family. Number 1. I was only 11 years old, and my brother was only 8. We were walking our dog Buster around the block in the dark. Buster was a husky German Shepherd mix. Upon turning the corner to the other side of the block, we ran into a tall man who greeted us with a smile. He stopped in his tracks and seemed to expect us to as well. It seemed he was trying to start a conversation, but we just kept walking past. My brother kept looking back, telling me that the man was following us. He was right. Each time I turned around, the man was the same distance from us, but he would stop looking whenever we looked. I motioned to my brother to walk faster. The faster we started to walk, it seemed the closer he got to us. We were approaching our house, but my heart stopped when I heard the muffled scream of my brother as he was grabbed and pulled away. Buster started barking like a rabid dog, and I shit you not, pulled the leash out of my hands and sunk his teeth into the man's leg. I could see the blood dripping down his leg as his screams caught the attention of the people inside their houses. Our neighbor came outside, and we explained everything while pointing at the man. The man began hopping away. I had to put the leash back on Buster to keep him from chasing him. My neighbor called the cops. She was a tiny little woman. She couldn't do anything to that guy even if she tried. She then walked to our door and told our parents what happened. Police came to question us and the neighbor. They caught the man limping down a sidewalk a few blocks over shortly after. One of the cops told us our dog was a hero, but we already knew that.
When I moved out of my parents' house and into my own apartment, I had a lot of junk and stuff that I needed to get rid of. I never liked Craigslist because I always found it sketchy, especially after hearing so many stories about it. So I listed a lot of my things on Facebook Marketplace. Things that wouldn't fit in my apartment and that my dad wanted out of the house. My weight set, some old childhood toys, book sets, and a whole bunch of other things. The weight set was what I listed for the most money. It had a barbell, a plate tree stand, and a bunch of plates. I was selling it for $340, which I thought wasn't a bad deal. Surprisingly, I wasn't getting many bites. I'd have some people here and there message asking if it's still available, and then never message me again about it. Until a few days after posting it, a guy named Joe messaged me showing interest. His profile picture was pretty grainy, but it was a guy with a fishing hat on holding up a fish. His account info was private. I couldn't see how many friends he had or anything, only that we had 3 mutuals. All 3 of them were girls from my town. The guy's last name was also the last name of a Joe I knew from my town who used to date a girl I was somewhat friendly with, so I right away assumed it was him, especially since I knew that guy liked to fish. After telling him it's still available, he said, "Great, when can I pick it up?" I was pleasantly surprised he didn't try to haggle the price down at all. I said I'm available any night after 7. He said he could come by tonight around 11 p.m. after work. I said that's fine. A little late in my opinion, but if that's what worked for his schedule, it worked for me. I then decided to just be a little friendly and say, "Hey, you used to date Gina, right?" I saw the typing indicator in the chat for a second, but then it went away and he didn't reply. Not for a couple minutes. Then he said yes. I thought it was a little strange, the random pause, but it could have been anything. Maybe he thought it was weird I brought it up, so I just said, "I knew I recognized your name, LOL." He read the message but didn't respond for half an hour. Then I got a message back from him saying, "Yeah, LOL. Can you send me your address and I'll let you know when I'm coming?" So I sent him my address. He read it and didn't respond for many hours. By the time I got home from work, it was around 6. I went to the gym and got back around 7:30, the whole time waiting for some kind of acknowledgement from Joe. And then he finally messaged back asking for my number. I gave it to him, and seconds later, I got a text from a number with our area code. I have an iPhone, and when I texted him back, it was green. I sometimes will find that to be a red flag and possibly scams, because most people I know have iPhones. But I wasn't thinking that way with this, because I knew this guy already. He said he'd be over in a few hours, and so I continued about my business. It was now around 11 o'clock, and I was waiting patiently for his text or call. I sent a follow-up saying, "Let me know when you're coming." It was around 11:30 that he texted me, "I'm here, come out." I looked out the front window of my apartment, and I saw a dark-colored car out front in the street. I tried calling him so I could tell him that I need help bringing the weights outside. He rejected my call, and then he texted again, "Yo, come out." I texted back, "I see you. You can come in. I just need help with the weights. There's a lot of them." He texted back, "Nah, gotta see if you're straight first." I had to process what the hell that even meant for a second. All I knew was this did not seem like the way this white-as-hell fishing dude would be texting. I tried calling one more time, and he denied the call again. Now I was suspicious. I decided to text that girl Gina, along with the mutual friends I had with Joe on Facebook. The first one to text back was this girl Angela, who said, "OMG, that's a catfish, someone's pretending to be him." When I asked why she added it, she said it must have been a different name when it added her. I looked out the window again, and the car was still there. Someone was about to do something bad to me. I wasn't sure what, or who, or why. I had no way to contact the real Joe because he didn't seem to have any actual social media profiles. Not public, at least. I kept the door shut and locked and didn't respond any further. I turned off the light in the living room and kinked the blind just a bit, and I swear on my life, there was a guy hiding behind one of the bushes in front of the house. I watched until the car outside honked its horn, and then I saw the guy in the bushes run to the car, and then the car sped off. Witnessing that, I didn't feel relief. I felt gut-wrenching fear, not only of what I just narrowly avoided, but the fact that those people now had my address. The Facebook profile was deleted the next day, after a bunch of people reported it, though I think the people who made the account deleted it or deactivated it themselves. Joe himself confirmed he had nothing to do with any of that, and that someone must have been using his pictures and name to try and scam people in the area. Though I'm not so sure it was someone trying to scam random people, because days later I got this threatening text. "Hey yo bitch, watch your back, we know where you live. Keep trying to talk to my girl, see what happens man, we'll fuck you up right outside your crib. Sleep with one eye open pussy, we watching." I brought this to the police, but it was such a low priority report to them that I doubt they ever even looked into it. I have no reason to lie when I say I haven't tried talking to anyone's girl in the slightest. At the time of this incident, I had been seeing a girl pretty much exclusively. I think it's connected. I don't know who it is, I don't know what they were going to do to me if I opened the door, but unfortunately I've had to live in slight fear in my new apartment ever since moving here. Fortunately, I haven't gotten any more threatening or random texts, but I still pretty much always check outside my windows first before leaving the apartment at night. It had to be 2018. I was selling this old pinball machine that we had from our childhood. It wasn't some crazy arcade-level pinball machine that would cost thousands of dollars, but it was definitely worth a few $100. It had been sitting in my parents' attic for the longest time, so I wanted to sell it before one of my sisters had the same idea. I didn't really want anyone to know about this because then I'd have to split the money, so I chose to list it when my family was away on a trip that I couldn't go on due to work. I'm a bit of a sneak, I know, but you gotta do what you gotta do. My parents' house is on the really nice side of town, but not in a gated community. I put the pinball machine up on Facebook Marketplace for $200. The next day, I got a message from some account with no profile picture with the name Jasmine, expressing interest in the pinball machine. They offered $175. I agreed to that number. We set up a time for when she would come, but when that time came, she never showed up. She messaged me saying, "I'll be there soon, I'll be there soon." It was getting late now and I had work the next day. I asked her if she would be here by 11 the latest. She said 11:30. I asked if we could do this tomorrow instead, but she said she's already on her way. So I just stayed up a little later waiting. 11:45 rolls around and she finally tells me that she's here. I went to the front door and saw there was a car out front. What I wasn't expecting was to see all 4 doors of the car opening and 4 people stepping out, 1 girl and 3 guys. I messaged her, "Are you here with people?" At this point, she wasn't answering her messages anymore. I watched as the 4 people approached my door. I kept the storm door locked. These 3 guys looked kind of big, and all 4 of these people looked like trouble. As they got close enough, I said, "Are you Jasmine?" She said through the door, "Yeah." I said, "I can't let all of you guys in my house. My parents are asleep." Obviously lying. Jasmine, or so she claimed her name was, tried opening the door yelling, "What are you talking about?" As she saw it was locked, she started knocking on the glass. I decided it was best to shut the front door at this point. I heard their voices yelling outside for a while and the doorbell ringing. I heard one of the guys, or maybe even multiple of them, yelling obscenities and insults at me through the 2 doors, making me only gladder I didn't let them in. These were not the kinds of people I wanted in my parents' house, especially when I'm alone. I realized this whole thing was an awful idea when I heard their voices laughing and yelling on the front stoop for like 10 minutes after I shut the door. I looked out my little brother's bedroom window upstairs, which is directly above the driveway, and I saw one of the guys pissing in the empty driveway. No cars in the driveway was not a good look. The girl yelled something directed at me as they finally started to walk away, but I didn't hear what it was. I just thanked the Lord when they drove away, and I went upstairs to go to sleep. I was having trouble sleeping that night though, thinking of the interaction. So, fully awake, a couple of hours after climbing into bed, I heard a crash from downstairs. It was unmistakably the sound of a window being shattered. I sprang up, but right before sprinting to make sure the bedroom door was locked, I stopped myself and instead quietly got out of bed and tiptoed to the door. I had already locked it. I tiptoed back to my bed and had my phone in hand, ready to call 911. For some stupid reason, I was waiting till I heard any other kind of sounds before dialing, and eventually, I heard the sound I needed to hear. Footsteps rapidly coming upstairs. I dialed 911 as I felt like throwing up. The footsteps outside the room didn't even sound like they were trying to be quiet. I whispered the entire time I was on the line with the dispatcher. Time was moving in reverse. I hid literally under my bed as I listened to people ransacking the house. In reality, they were in and out in less than 5 minutes, way before the police actually showed up. The backyard window was shattered. Things were stolen from just about each room. Ironically, the pinball machine wasn't taken. What happened from there was I got a police report number. I made an appointment to see a couple detectives at the police station and shared with them all the details I had, including the Facebook account of the Jasmine girl. I fabricated the story a bit, saying someone in the house threatened me. My reasoning for this was I felt that this case would actually be taken seriously if I claimed I was threatened. To my surprise, they did take this seriously. The detectives apparently gathered the necessary data of the Facebook account in question to track this Jasmine girl, who lived a few towns over, in a less than desirable area. And with a search warrant, they searched her house and found multiple belongings stolen from my parents' house. She ratted out the 3 men who accompanied her, and they were all charged with burglary. I think most of the stuff that was stolen was recovered. I'm sure there were some things that I wasn't aware of that were stolen that were never returned, but to this day it hasn't come up, so it's fine. I think by me claiming I was verbally threatened may have definitely helped make the detectives take this more seriously, but I could be wrong. My family was of course livid at first, but came to be understanding about it in the end. I was searching Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace for a new phone. This was a long time ago, so it had to be like an iPhone 7 or something. Phones still had the home buttons back then. I found this listing for a phone. It was some generic looking post. iPhone whatever for sale, new, around $300. It was a really good deal for the time, that I remember. He told me all the small details I needed to know, that it was factory unlocked, never opened, and stuff like that. He sent me a video of the box too, still sealed. The guy, whose name was Melvin, seemed nice and easy to talk to over text. I got his number and we discussed a pickup point. His location on the Facebook ad was much closer to me, but over text he was telling me he was only there this morning, and now he went about an hour north. I wasn't happy about this, but this was a really good deal and I didn't want to pass it up. I started asking a bunch of friends if they'd want to come on an adventure with me. Really just a way of making the chore of accompanying me for an hour drive seem fun. My friend Martina actually agreed to come with, on the promise that I buy her food for coming. So this Melvin guy sent me the address of a police precinct about an hour away, saying he only does deals in police precinct parking lots to avoid scams. I obviously had no problem with this. In fact, it made me feel a little more confident in this whole thing. I picked up Martina on the way around 8:30 at night, and off we went. She being in the car and having someone to talk to made the trip more fun. It was also a Friday night, so afterwards we could go out and do whatever we wanted. When I got off the highway, we were about 10 minutes away, and we found ourselves in a very secluded, quiet area. It seemed like a lot of different wooded areas. Occasional buildings and houses, and then more woods. We got to the police precinct, and there was no one visibly parked in the parking lot, besides empty police cars, of course. We drove around the whole building a couple times and didn't see this Melvin guy, who said he was in a black Altima, so I decided to call him. He picked up and said he's having issues with his car on the side of the road, and asked if I could come to him. He sent his location and I checked it. He was on the side of some random road with nothing on either side, and by nothing I mean woods. That's the kind of area we were in. He asked me to come help him jump his car. He had jumper cables. I said, yeah, I guess I could do that. I mean, we drove the hour to get there. I didn't want to just drive another hour for nothing. Martina was shaking her head the whole time I was on the phone. The guy said, see you soon, and hung up. Martina then basically screamed, no way, this is sketchy, we're going home. I told her we'll just drive past the location he sent and see what's up. I did agree with her though. This seemed incredibly sketchy. I just was very upset if we drove 2 hours for nothing. We did drive to the location, and when we got to it, we saw the reflection of a car's front lights coming up on the pitch black road we found ourselves on. As we got closer, I slowed down, and it was in fact a black car, but we couldn't see anyone inside or outside of it. Mind you, it was very dark, but I feel like we would have seen someone's head on the inside or something. Martina said to just keep driving, and I said I know. It was about the sketchiest thing I'd ever seen. A pitch black road between two patches of woods, no streetlights, no other cars in sight. A pretty convenient place to break down and have someone who's coming with a wad of cash to buy something from you come and meet. I drove right past it. Immediately, Melvin starts calling me over and over. I ignored every single call. Then he texted me saying, I saw you just pass me, why didn't you stop? Turn around. Ignored. Martina is a very positive person, so she laughed about this whole situation, and then said, okay, you owe me food. So I looked up the nearest diner, and we stopped there for some food. It was a quiet, small diner. We were just about the only people in there, even on a Friday night. The waitress just took our coffee order, when a lone guy with his hood up steps into the diner and sits in one of the bar stools. He was wearing a navy blue, dirty-looking hoodie. He glanced over to Martina and I, then looked straight ahead, talking to the lady working behind the counter, apparently ordering a coffee. The man kept glancing at our table like every minute, so I whispered to Martina, don't look now, but that guy at the counter might be the Melvin guy. The waitress came with our coffees. I asked if we were ready to order. I said a few minutes, please. When the lady behind the counter handed that man his coffee, He said loud and clear, "Thank you, darling." It was that guy from the phone's voice, Melvin or whatever his real name was. I told Martina that's him. We need to pay the check and leave. I waved the server over and whispered to her if we can just get the check. She asked if something's wrong, and I noticed the guy look over as I said this. I said yes, we just needed some coffee for the road. So she got the check, I paid, we downed our coffees, and left the building. We got in my car, and Martina said, "Oh my god, he's getting up." I looked into the diner and saw that guy leaving towards the door. As quickly as possible, I drove us out of that parking lot and sped down the road. And yes, we noticed a black car in the parking lot that could have been the one that we saw on the side of the road. I was driving too fast for him to have caught up. We got back on the highway and I was flying for a while, until I got a low tire pressure light come on. I knew instantly he slashed my tire. The PSI was going down fast, so to avoid damage, I pulled to the side of the highway and parked it. I went out to confirm that my tire was slashed. I had to replace the tire with the spare, which took about 15 minutes. The whole thing was a disaster, and if you're wondering, yes, I still got Martina dinner that night. Now Martina and I look at it as a crazy story that we can look back on and tell people. It's absolutely horrifying, though, how close we were to walking into a trap. I live in the state of Washington, in the Pacific Northwest. I used to work at a late-night diner on the side of the highway. I was 29 years old. I worked the closing shift pretty often. The diner would close at 2 a.m., which was incredibly late considering how scarcely populated the area is. But even so, given the proximity to the highway, there would usually be at least 1 or 2 customers in the building until closing time. Having grown up in the South and moved up here, I can tell you the people are different. In the South, there's a huge emphasis on hospitality and small talk. But up here, people here are kind, but not overly friendly. I feel like the air lends itself more to introversion. I used to be a waitress down south, and I'm telling you from experience, the customers were a lot chattier down there. Up here, people seem to want to keep to themselves a little more. This was approaching closing time. The kitchen's last call was at 2 technically, even though the diner was advertised to close at 2. It was really frowned upon if a customer would come in and order something that late, but it did happen. It happened that night, as a matter of fact. There were only 2 employees in the building, myself and the chef. It was like 1:50 a.m., and in comes a lone, heavy-set man. He was wearing awkwardly high jeans, a gray shirt tucked in, a brown jacket, and he had a brown mustache and glasses. I asked him if he'd like to sit at the bar or a table, and he asked for a table. He kept smiling the whole time, so I smiled back. I gave him a menu and informed him the kitchen closes in 10 minutes. He looked at the menu for a few seconds, and then said he'd like a black coffee and some French toast. Around this time, he also introduced himself as Nolan. Luckily, his order was simple enough. I went into the kitchen and told the chef the order, who still had a slightly annoyed face in reaction, which I just responded to with, "I know." I stepped back out to the dining area, and Nolan waved me over. As I neared, he struck up a conversation with me, something rather unusual for folk around here at this hour. He asked me if I was from the area, and started complaining about all the potholes in the road around here. I responded, yeah, it's all the freezes we get in the winter. Basic small talk. I did tell him that I'm from around here, and he perhaps pressed a bit too specifically about where I was from. I told him a vague, general area. I never tell people exactly where I live, obviously. He said he just moved to town not too long ago. As he spoke, I analyzed his body language and character in general. He seemed like a somewhat nerdy older guy, and this may have been his idea of flirting. Didn't bother me much though. I dealt with it back home in the South all the time, so I was used to it. Since this was the last customer of the night, the chef personally came out and placed his food on the counter. I went to grab it and bring it to Nolan. By this point, he had his food and coffee, and everything else was about ready to close up shop. I wiped down the counters and tables and everything already. I stayed behind the counter, a little further away from Nolan, because I was tired of conversing with him. My social energy was drained, and I was ready to get home and go to sleep. When he finally finished his food, I went to drop off his check before he even asked for it, politely, non-verbally implying that we were closed and we wanted to get home. He paid by card and then he left. The chef would be the one closing up the place, so after cleaning Nolan's table and gathering all my belongings, I said goodbye to the guy working in the kitchen and walked out to my car. There were 3 cars in the lot, mine, the chef's, and a third one that I couldn't explain. It was a silver, older looking car, like a 2005 Toyota or Audi or something. I wasn't sure. I also couldn't tell if the windows were tinted or if it was just so dark out that I couldn't see into the car. But I wasn't able to tell if someone was in the car or not. It was parked on the dirt closest to the highway. I wondered if it was Nolan's car. I got in my car and started heading home. The diner to my home is about 20 minutes. I was on the highway when a ding came from my dashboard and the tire pressure screen popped up. I started freaking out. I didn't know how to change a tire. I'd never even called my roadside assistance company. I was still a decent way from home. The tire pressure to my rear passenger side tire was dropping rather rapidly all of a sudden, from 20 down to 10, and then I started feeling not just the steering wheel shake, but the entire car shake. I had to pull off the road. I came to a stop and got out of the car real quick to look at the tire, and it was as flat as could be. Suddenly, as if they were just flicked on, a pair of headlights lit up the side of the road as it approached me, then slowing to a stop. I hurried back inside my car and locked the door. I truly didn't know what to do. And then there was a light tap at my window. I looked up and saw Nolan, the man from the restaurant. He waved at me with a smile. He was wearing gloves now. For the sake of the story, I'll use a fake name for myself. Nolan said through the window, "Kathy, is that you? Are you okay?" He laughed, acting like it was such a coincidence. I felt a knot in my stomach suddenly. I instantly knew he did this. I'm not a dumbass. He motioned for me to lower the window. I lowered it literally maybe 2 inches, just enough to speak through. He asked if I needed help. I told him I had a flat tire. He played dumb, asking me which one. I said the back passenger side. He started walking over to the other side, and at this moment, I dialed 911 on my phone. I let the phone sit on my lap as Nolan walked back to my side. He said through the window with his creepy smile that he knows how to change a flat. He asked me to step out of the car, and I said I'm waiting for my boyfriend to come and help me change it. During all of this, I heard the 911 operator speaking into the phone, but it wasn't loud enough for Nolan to hear it. I tried to make it as clear as possible my situation to the operator without being too obvious for Nolan to catch on. I basically said, "I'm not sure how I got a flat, but I'm waiting for my boyfriend to come help me change it. Thanks for offering to help, sir." He stood there for a second with a much less friendly look on his face. Then he walked away from the window. I took this opportunity to speak very quietly into the phone that this man slashed my tire and he's trying to get me out of the car. The operator asked my location, and I quickly opened the map on my phone and told her the name of the road I pulled off onto. The deafening shattering of glass immediately to my left made me scream as shards of glass fell onto my lap. I screamed at the top of my lungs at the man, "I'm on the phone with the police. It's the police," as I showed him the phone screen. He looked at my screen and then reached inside the car. I screamed again at the top of my lungs as I was hysterically crying, expecting him to try and grab me or choke me. But instead, he grabbed my phone and launched it in the direction of the highway. He then ran back to his car and sped off down the dark road. I heard the screeching of his tires as he made a sharp right turn and then disappeared. I wanted to go look for my phone, but with no flashlights in the car, I'd be running out there to look in the pitch dark. The only light was from my car. I had no choice but to wait and pray that Nolan, or whatever his real name was, didn't come back. I'm very grateful that I was able to tell the 911 operator my location in time. I heard the unmistakable sound of police sirens in the distance, and I started to cry tears of joy when I realized they were getting closer. I got out of my car and started waving my arms in the air until I saw the flashing lights turn off the highway onto this random road. Pretty soon a second police car showed up, and then a third. During all this time, we found my phone, which was completely destroyed. I described the man to them along with his car and pointed the direction in which he went. One of the police officers left in that direction as they also put the word out on their radio. They were honestly the nicest cops I'd ever met in my life. They changed my tire for me, and one of them even gave me an escort home, having me follow from behind. The main officer told me that they would investigate the video surveillance from the diner and keep me updated with any news. I got a call a week later from that officer, informing me that the investigation was still ongoing based on the surveillance footage. That was the last I'd heard of it. I don't think they caught him, sadly. I never returned to that diner job again after that night. I was not risking that man ever finding me again. I'm a 15-year-old guy working at an amusement park in upstate New York. This only happened a year ago, and it still gives me chills thinking about it. It was a crisp October Sunday, one of the last few days the park would be open until it closed until May. It seemed like just another normal day at work. Boy, was I wrong. After checking in and working at my station for about 5 hours, I looked at my watch. 4:55 p.m. was the time. My shift ended in 5 minutes. I felt relieved and exhausted. As I began packing up my things, a man with a scraggly beard and messy hair approached me. He was wearing a gray t-shirt with a few stains on it and black sweatpants covered in holes. I thought to myself, I just need to get through this last one. "Can I help you?" I asked the man. He stared at me for a few seconds, and then he kept turning his head as if someone were following him. I was starting to get a little creeped out. "Sir, can I help you?" I repeated my question, starting to sound a little annoyed. He looked at me for a couple seconds, and finally responded, saying with a stutter, "Where are your bathrooms?" He said this in a whispered tone of voice. "Up the hill to the right," I responded cheerfully. The man started to walk in that direction. As he did, he kept turning and looking at me. I avoided eye contact, even though I was more freaked out than ever. Next thing I knew, one of my coworkers came to take my spot. I grabbed my things, practically sprinted through the park to the back room to punch out of my shift, and then to the bathroom. I changed out of my work clothes and headed to the employee parking lot. I sat on a bench and waited for my coworker Jordan, who was 17, to pick me up. After waiting for what seemed like hours, Jordan finally picked me up. Before going home, we went to the local diner to eat some cheeseburgers for dinner. While eating in the diner, I noticed something odd. The same man who I helped find the bathrooms at the park was at the diner, sitting a couple tables down, staring right at me. My heart skipped a beat. I told Jordan about it, and he just shrugged it off. "Probably just a coincidence, Ben, don't worry." "Yeah," I said, even though I was pretty concerned. After dinner, we got back in the car and started the 35-minute drive back home. At the first red light we came to, I saw something that made my heart skip another beat. There, sitting in his white Honda to the right of us, the man from the park and diner. Sure enough, he was staring back at me. I told Jordan, and he started to worry a little. After arriving to our street, we made sure to take a couple laps around the block to make sure that man wasn't following us. Once it was clear, Jordan dropped me off at home. My mom and sister were out at the mall, and my dad was on a business trip, so I was home alone. After immediately jumping into bed, I heard a noise at my window. I slowly got up and looked outside and saw something that will forever send chills down my spine. Right there on my front lawn was the man, looking right at my window, smiling. I immediately grabbed my phone and called 911, but once the police arrived, the man was gone. I immediately quit my job at the amusement park right after the park closed for winter. I haven't seen the man since this incident. This was an experience that I'll never forget. I was working a late night shift at the diner I worked at for a year. It was a rainy night. In fact, it was pouring. Nights like these usually meant less customers because people aren't exactly rushing to drive in the rain. I was expecting a slow night. It was for the most part. I was working until midnight. At some point closer to the end of my shift, in came a man and a woman significantly younger looking than him. He looked about 40. She looked like she were in her 20s. They both looked at me the second they walked in, and so I went over to greet them and ask how many. They said just 2, so I brought them to a table. They took a while to order, and I noticed they were talking really quietly to each other. After they did order, the man started striking up a conversation with me. I'm a generally talkative person, which was why I've always thrived in the hospitality industry, so I started chatting their ears off since it was a slow night anyway. Typical waitress-customer back and forth. The girl oddly didn't say much. The man did most of the talking. so I started directing my questions more to him. I can't remember every last thing we said to each other, obviously, but one thing that stuck in my head was when the man asked me, "Do you live alone?" I did live alone, and still do live alone. I answered his question honestly, saying I live about 10 minutes north up the road, and that it's really quiet and boring around here. At the time, I didn't see his question as any kind of red flag, albeit maybe a bit strange of a question. But something about a man being with another female makes you automatically assume they're not a threat. I made jokes about being stuck here forever and such, and then walked away from the table. I'd say about 45 minutes later, they finished and left. Fast forward probably an hour later, and we were closing up the place. I said goodbye to my coworkers and rushed to my car to avoid getting more soaked than I needed to from the rain. It was still pouring outside. I drove home slow because of the conditions. The second I got home, I ran straight to the front door and let myself in. I didn't even notice that neither of the other tenants' cars were parked outside. My living situation was the middle floor of a home with 3 apartments in it. There's a side entrance with a stairway that has an entrance to all 3 floors. My being on the first floor meant that I could enter through the front door. After setting my keys and stuff down on the kitchen counter, there was a manic pounding at the front door. It was nearly 1 a.m. I had no idea who it could be besides maybe one of the other tenants in the house. There's 2 doors, the glass storm door and the inner door. I always keep both locked for safety. I opened the inner door and saw a girl on the other side of the storm door. She was drenched. She was wearing a gray sweater with the hood up, partially obscuring her face. She begged me through the door to let her in so she could use a phone. Before doing that, I first had to feel her out, of course. I asked her if she's lost. She replied that a creepy man was following her around and she needed help. Something about this girl, though, was strikingly familiar. I asked her who the man was and where he was. She turned around and then said, "I don't know." She kept begging me to open the door. She even tried opening it herself. I then realized why she looked familiar. She looked like the girl from the diner that was with that man. So I asked her straight up, "Weren't you at my diner before?" She didn't acknowledge my question. Maybe she didn't hear me, but she turned around once again and started freaking out, pounding on the door, saying, "There he is." I looked beyond her to the street, and I saw a large man slowly walking towards the house. As the man slowly got closer, the girl kept looking at me with a look that would imply she's more confused than anything as to why I'm not opening the door. The man got close enough for me to realize I was right. It was that man from the diner, and this was the girl sitting with him at the diner. I think she saw it in my eyes the moment I realized, and she turned to the man and screamed, "Go!" The man started charging at the door, and I slammed the inner door shut and locked it. I didn't hear any kinds of knocks or bangs. I wasn't about to open the door again to check if they were still there, though. I went to the stairway to go upstairs and knock on the upstairs tenant's door. The stairway is separated from the 3 apartments by a door on each level. After knocking a bunch of times, nobody answered. I tried the same thing at the downstairs door. No answer either. This was when I looked out the windows and realized none of their cars were here tonight. I was alone in the house. I went back up to my apartment and then locked the stairway door. My mind was racing, conjuring up possible explanations. The most obvious explanation was that it was a trap to get me to open the door so that they could rob me, or worse. It suddenly made sense why that man asked me if I lived alone. I had to just sit on the couch for a few minutes and think. All I could hear was the sound of the pouring rain outside. I thought about calling the police, but chose not to in that moment. After a few minutes, I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth and get ready for bed, when I heard a knocking sound. I left the bathroom to listen, and I was right. It was a knocking sound. It was coming from the stairway door. I walked over to it, thinking it was one of the tenants. I said, "Who is it?" There was no verbal response, but whoever it was knocked again. I said both of the other tenants' names. No response. The only thing I could say is, "If you don't identify yourself, I'm calling the police." I practically screamed it. They heard me for sure. They knocked once again. So I yelled, "What do you want?" And a voice from the other side said, "Your blood on me." I ran to my room and locked myself inside and called the police. I hid in my closet while I was on the phone, and I stayed in there. The sounds of the rain, wind, and thunder outside constantly startled me. I worried about any little sound coming from inside the house. It was the longest 10 minutes of my life before I was told to let the police inside the house at the front door. They wrote a report of everything. They checked the front and backyard. Then they suggested I find another place to sleep for a few nights. I took that advice and packed a bag real quick while they were there, and then left to drive to my parents' house for the night. I returned the next day to the house. There was a knock at the stairway door, and this time it was actually my neighbor from upstairs. I opened the door, and he pointed at the door and asked, "What's this about?" I was horrified to see a message on the door saying, "Thanks for the service, Beth." It was written in marker. I couldn't stay there for a while. I had to stay with my parents for a few weeks until this blew over. I got a new apartment pretty close by the following month. Better safe than sorry.